This is Travis, a young man born on July 28, 1977 in sunny California, was a sales department employee. His parents were Horror-Divid and Lisa Butt Morgan, an ordinary American family. One September day in 26, fate brought Travis together with an aspiring photographer, a 26-year-old blonde named Jodi Arias. It happened at a professional conference in vibrant Las Vegas, dedicated to prepaid and legal services, where Travis was representing his company. Jodi Arias, despite her young age, was already actively seeking opportunities to collaborate with a company where Travis worked. Their acquaintance happened spontaneously, but from the first minutes, there was an incredible chemistry between them. They communicated perfectly, as if they had known each other all their lives, and seemed to have a lot in common. Wanting to continue their communication in a more private setting, Travis invited Jodi to his company's official dinner as his personal guest. It was there, amidst business conversations and glasses of wine, that a spark ignited between them, which later grew into a passionate romance. Jodi was enchanted by Travis's sense of humor, ease, and cheerful disposition. Next to him, she felt comfortable and carefree, forgetting about all her troubles. Their meetings became regular, filled with laughter, passion, and dreams of a shared future. As an experienced detective, I would note that often it is precisely such seemingly perfect acquaintances that can lead to unpredictable and even tragic consequences. Behind the mask of attractiveness and friendliness, dark secrets and dangerous intentions can hide. However, at that moment, nothing foreshadowed trouble. The lovers enjoyed each other's company, making plans for the future and not suspecting what a dramatic turn their relationship would take. From the outside, it seemed that Travis and Jodi were a perfect couple, created by fate itself. They complemented each other, shared common interests and dreams. However, as practice shows, often behind the ideal facade, deep cracks hide that can destroy even the strongest relationships. And this case was no exception. After that fateful acquaintance at the conference, Jodi decided to end her relationship with her then-boyfriend and dive headfirst into a romance with Travis. However, distance stood in the way of their happiness. The lovers lived in different states. Travis lived in another region, while Jodi remained in Palm Desert, California. But this did not become an obstacle to their feelings, and they continued to keep in touch despite the geographical remoteness. According to one of Travis' friends, Jodi made the impression of a very attractive and friendly girl. Her long blonde hair and slender figure could not leave any man indifferent. During a joint dinner with Travis, they constantly talked about something, and from the outside, it seemed that a genuine mutual affection had arisen between them. Travis and Jodi's relationship developed rapidly, despite the distance. They constantly communicated by phone, exchanged messages, and tried to see each other in person as often as possible. It seemed that nothing could overshadow their happiness. However, I would note that not all of Travis' friends shared his admiration for the new girl. Some of them, who had the chance to get to know Jodi better and observe the development of their relationship, felt a certain uneasiness. Perhaps it was some kind of sixth sense that hinted that something disturbing was hiding behind Jodi's attractive appearance and sweet smile. But lovers rarely listen to the advice of friends, especially when it comes to matters of the heart. Travis was so enchanted by Jodi that he did not pay attention to the warnings of those around him. He was convinced that he had found his true love and was ready to fight for this relationship no matter what. As practice shows, often at the beginning of a romance, during the so-called rose-colored glasses period, lovers do not notice obvious alarming signs in the behavior of their other half. They idealize their partner, attributing desired qualities to them and ignoring potential flaws. And only with time, when the euphoria subsides and the relationship reaches a new level, true faces and intentions begin to reveal themselves. But despite all the warnings, Travis and Jodi continued to enjoy their romance. They made plans for the future, dreamed of a life together, and were ready to overcome any obstacles on the way to their happiness. However, as time will tell, sometimes the greatest danger lurks from those we love the most. And right now, the crack in the relationship that I will tell you about will happen. The more people hear this story, the more people can draw conclusions for themselves and protect themselves from similar circumstances. This is very important. Despite the passionate feelings and plans for a shared future, after 5 months, Jodi and Travis' relationship reached a dead end. They decided to break up, but as often happens in such cases, they could not completely sever the connection. The former lovers continued to maintain physical intimacy and communicate as if nothing had changed. At first, it seemed that such a format of the relationship suited them perfectly. They remained a part of each other's lives, but without burdensome obligations and promises. But everything changed when Travis started dating another woman. The news of her ex-boyfriend's new passion came as a real blow to Jodi. She could not come to terms with the thought that Travis now belonged to another. Jealousy clouded her mind, pushing her to reckless actions. Jodi began to obsessively follow Travis' life on social media. She hacked his accounts, read private correspondence, trying to find even the slightest hint of his new relationship. It became a kind of obsession for her, absorbing all her thoughts and actions. Once Travis, seemingly jokingly but with a note of anxiety, said to his friend, "Don't be surprised if one day you find me dead." Perhaps deep down, he already felt that Jodi's obsession could have fatal consequences. I can say that such jokes are often a kind of cry for help. People who find themselves in toxic and dangerous relationships sometimes unconsciously send signals to others, hoping that someone will intervene and save them from the threat. But at that moment, neither Travis himself nor his friends gave proper significance to this joke. They attributed it to Jodi's eccentricity and did not perceive her behavior as a real danger. Months passed and Jodi's obsession only intensified. She gave Travis no peace, stalked him, threw tantrums and caused scandals. Eventually, at the end of May 2008, tired of her endless antics, Travis gave Jodi an ultimatum. Either she leaves his life forever or he will be forced to take radical measures. But was Jodi ready to let go of her obsession so easily? Could she come to terms with the idea that Travis would never belong to her again? The answers to these questions will sound right now because at that point, all the alarm bells were ringing at full force, foreshadowing the tragic denouement of this story. At the beginning of 2008, Travis had grand plans. He organized a business trip to Mexico, which was to take place on June 15th. And interestingly, he initially planned this trip together with Jodi. It would seem to be an ideal opportunity for lovers to spend time together, combining work and leisure under the scorching Mexican sun. But in April, the situation changed dramatically. Travis suddenly informed Jodi that the plans had changed, and instead of her, he had decided to take another girl with him. We can only imagine what a blow this was for Jodi, who had already managed to paint a perfect picture of their joint trip in her imagination. And so, the night of June 2nd arrived. Around 2 o'clock, Jodi, unable to bear the tension, began calling Travis. She dialed his number 4 times in a row, but he stubbornly did not answer. Perhaps he already felt then that a conversation with Jodi would not bring anything good and tried to avoid conflict. The longest call lasted only 17 seconds. Imagine this picture. Jodi engulfed in jealousy and anger, pressing the call button again and again, and Travis, tired of her intrusiveness, simply looking at the phone screen, not daring to answer. But Jodi did not give up. She kept calling, and eventually Travis couldn't stand it. He answered her call, and they talked for 18 minutes at first, and then for another 41 minutes. One can only guess what they were talking about and how tense this conversation was. The last conversation between them lasted 2 minutes and 48 seconds. What was said in those nearly 3 minutes? Did Jodi try to convince Travis to change his plans one last time? Or maybe she was already threatening him with reprisals. Unfortunately, we will never know for sure. I have seen many similar cases. When one person obsessively pursues another, giving them no peace day or night, it can drive even the most resilient personality to despair. And unfortunately, such situations often end in tragedy. So we have every reason to assume that these nightly calls from Jodi became a kind of point of no return in her relationship with Travis. She could not come to terms with his decision to take another girl with him on the trip and was ready to do anything to hinder these plans. And Travis, in turn, was already tired of her constant tantrums and scandals and sought to break this toxic bond as soon as possible. After that fateful phone conversation with Travis, Jodi decided to act. She rented a car, intending to make a long trip to the state of Utah. At first, her path led through Southern California, where she visited her friends at a work conference. It would seem to be an ordinary stop along the way, but as it turned out later, it had far-reaching consequences. During her stay in California, Jodi met with Ryan Burns, Travis' colleague, and it was from him that we learned several interesting details. It turns out that at the time of the meeting with Burns, Jodi's blonde hair had already been dyed dark chestnut. Moreover, Burns noticed cuts on her hands. A strange change of image and injuries, don't you think? It seems that Jodi was preparing for something important and tried to disguise her appearance. On June 6th, Jodi left California for Utah, stopping by the city of Alta along the way. All this time, she tried to contact Travis, leaving him numerous voice messages. Her obsession reached such a level that she even managed to gain access to the voicemail system of his mobile phone. One can only guess what words she left in those messages and whether they contained threats against Travis. When returning the rented car, Jodi had to explain a few strange things. First, according to the seller, The car managed to accumulate about 3,000 miles in a short period of time. Second, the rental clerk noticed the absence of floor mats in the cabin and the presence of suspicious red stains on the seats. However, unfortunately, these stains were never thoroughly investigated, as the company rushed to clean the car before the police examined it. As an experienced detective, I cannot help but note that all these details raise serious suspicions. Why did Jodi need to change her appearance so drastically? Why were there cuts on her hands? And most importantly, what were the mysterious red stains found in the car she rented? All these questions suggest that something sinister is hiding behind Jodi's outward decency. Of course, at that moment, no one could have predicted what tragic events this seemingly ordinary trip would lead to. But from the height of the years lived and taking into account all the circumstances of the case, we can say with confidence that it was during that period that Jodi embarked on a dark path from which there was no turning back. So let's set aside these alarming details for now and move a few days forward, when Travis' friends sounded the alarm, unable to contact him. It was their persistence and concern that led to the terrible discovery that forever changed the course of this story. On June 9th, Travis' friends sounded the alarm. They had not been able to contact him for several days, which was extremely unusual for such a communicative person. Even his roommates had not seen Travis during this time, simply thinking that he had gone somewhere on business. But the friends' concern grew with each passing hour, and they decided to visit his home to check if everything was all right. What they saw upon entering Travis' apartment was forever etched in their memory. There was a huge pool of blood on the floor, and Travis' body itself lay in the shower. It is hard to even imagine the shock and horror that gripped his friends at that moment. Without wasting a second, they called 911, summoning emergency services. The dispatcher, taking the call, asked standard questions. One of them concerned whether Travis was prone to suicide. Of course, his friends rejected such a possibility. They knew Travis as a cheerful and positive person who would never take such a step. Another question was more alarming. Was there anyone from Travis' circle who might wish him harm? And then Travis' friends remembered Jodi Arias, Travis' ex-girlfriend. They said that she literally stalked him, was wildly jealous, and even resorted to such extremes as hacking his Facebook page and damaging the tires of his car. It seemed that Jodi was obsessed with Travis and could not come to terms with the fact that he had left her. As a detective with many years of experience, I immediately realized that this information could be key to the investigation. Obsession and aggressive behavior of former partners often lead to tragic consequences, and although at that moment it was still too early to draw final conclusions, Jodi Arias automatically fell into the list of main suspects. Of course, investigators could not rule out other versions. Perhaps Travis had some enemies that even his closest friends did not know about, or it could have been an ordinary robbery gone wrong. But with each new detail, with each new fact that surfaced during the investigation, the arrow of suspicion increasingly pointed towards Jodi. Now the cops needed to act quickly and in a coordinated manner. Interrogate all possible witnesses, gather evidence, track the movements of suspects. Every minute was worth its weight in gold because the killer was still at large and could strike again at any moment. When the detectives arrived at the crime scene and began a thorough search of Travis' apartment, one of the first finds made us shudder. A camera was found in the washing machine. At first glance, nothing strange nowadays. Many people have digital cameras. But during further investigation, it turned out that this camera had been purchased quite recently, and most importantly, it was damaged. Such details immediately made us wary. Later, technical experts set about restoring the data from the camera, and what they found came as a real shock. In the recovered images, we saw Jodi Arias and Travis in rather intimate poses. The pictures were dated June 4th around 2 p.m. It turns out that on that day, Jodi was in Travis' apartment, and more than just a friendly meeting was taking place between them. But the most shocking thing was that the camera contained photographs of Travis immediately before the murder, during it, and even after. It was like some kind of eerie photo report taken by the killer himself. The last photo in which Travis was still alive was taken at 5:29 p.m. on the same day, and literally a few minutes later, the camera captured bloody scenes in his bathroom. In these terrible pictures, one could make out the silhouette of a person, probably Travis, lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood. The red liquid spread across the floor, creating eerie patterns, and on the wall of the corridor leading to the bathroom, a bloody handprint was clearly visible. Later, the examination showed that the print contained mixed DNA of both Jodi and Travis. In fact, investigators obtained irrefutable evidence that Jodi Arias was present at the crime scene at the time of Travis' murder. Her intimate photos with the victim are taken just a few hours before his death, as well as her handprints at the crime scene, all this spoke in favor of the fact that she was the main suspect. It was necessary to carefully analyze each photograph, each detail, in order to reconstruct an accurate picture of the events of that fatal day. But even then, we felt that we had taken a huge step towards solving this horrific crime. Now law enforcement had not just the testimony of friends about Jodi's obsession and aggressive behavior. In their hands were photographs that irrefutably proved her involvement in the murder, and although there was still a lot of work ahead of us, we were filled with determination to see the case through to the end and bring the perpetrators to justice. Only one question remained: why? What could have pushed a young woman to commit such a terrible crime? Love, jealousy, hatred. Or maybe there was something more behind this, something we did not yet understand. Believe me, what happened next just shocked me. July 15, 2008 became a decisive day in this case. It was then, based on the evidence gathered, that Jodi Arias was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. What happened next can boldly be called a theater of the absurd. At first, Jodi completely denied her presence in the city on the day of the crime. She claimed that the last time she saw Travis was back in March of that year. Imagine the shock we felt upon hearing such outright lies. After all, we had irrefutable evidence in our hands that it was on June 4th that Jodi was in Travis' apartment, and not just there, but had an intimate relationship with him. But the most impressive thing was that Jodi managed to stick to this false version for a whole 2 years. Only after such a long time, realizing perhaps that her position did not stand up to any criticism, she suddenly changed her testimony. Now she claimed that she was indeed in Travis' apartment on the night of the murder, but only because he himself had called her. Eventually, in March 2013, after long weeks of trial, Jodi Arias was found guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. The jury could not come to a unanimous decision on the death penalty, so Jodi was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. But even behind bars, this woman continued to amaze with her behavior. During interrogations, she could suddenly start singing, laughing, talking to herself, or even doing a handstand. It was so strange and inappropriate that even seasoned guards could not contain their surprise. But perhaps the most shocking thing for me was the fact that Jodi attended Travis' memorial service. She came there, although she knew for sure that everyone suspected her of this terrible murder. And the whole time, while Travis' friends and relatives were mourning his death, Jodi sat with a stone face. She did not shed a single tear, did not show any sympathy. It seemed that she was not at all worried about the grief of other people. Now Jodi Arias is serving her sentence in the Arizona State Prison Complex. And even there, she manages to be in the spotlight. Recently, in one interview, she said that she receives a lot of love from fans behind bars. "There is so much love in my direction that I can't even respond to it now," she said with a smile. In April 2019, Jodi filed an appeal against her sentence, claiming that she did not receive a fair trial. But on March 24, 2020, the Arizona Court of Appeals upheld the verdict without changes. Thus ended one of the loudest and most scandalous criminal cases in US history.
I just want to make it clear that I've never had intention of taking my twin sister's life. And if I could take back what I've done, I would in a heartbeat.
On January 8, 1992, an extraordinary event took place in the city of Camden. New Jersey identical twin girls Amanda and Anna Ramirez were born into the world. The girls arrived just minutes apart, like two little angels entering this life hand in hand.
From their very first days, the sisters shared a special bond that only grew stronger over the years. The girls' parents, immigrants from Puerto Rico, had built a large, loving family in pursuit of a better life. Despite the hardships they faced on their journey to the American dream, they managed to keep their home warm and united. Amanda and Anna grew up surrounded by older siblings, with younger sisters arriving later. Yet the twins stood out from the rest with their uncanny resemblance and inseparable bond. From a very young age, the sisters were like two peas in a pod. They adored dressing alike, playing with identical toys, and spending every waking moment together. It seemed Amanda and Anna understood each other without words, sensing the other's moods and emotions. Even childhood squabbles were quickly forgotten as they became best friends again. I've seen photos of Amanda and Anna as children, and I must say their likeness is simply astonishing. It must have been challenging even for their parents to tell them apart at times. That closeness between sisters is unique, but it also had the potential to cause issues down the road. Watching Amanda and Anna during those years, one could only marvel at the strength of their connection. They were like two shoots of the same tree, reaching for each other, drawing strength and inspiration. Their parents and family took immense pride in their special girls and rejoiced that in this big, often harsh world, they had each other. Little did anyone know then what trials lay ahead and how their unique bond would impact the course of events. But in those carefree childhood days, everything seemed so simple and bright, with so many uncharted paths still to explore. The birth of twins is always something special, but Amanda and Anna's story is truly one of a kind. Their loving, close-knit upbringing built a strong foundation for their future lives. However, as we know, life often throws unexpected curveballs, and this case is a prime example of how even the strongest bonds can be tested by fate. From the very first days, Amanda and Anna's parents noticed their daughter's incredible bond that seemed to have formed in the womb itself. They recounted how in those early months, the sisters would even sleep in the same crib as though unable to be apart. This special connection only intensified over the years, forging Amanda and Anna into a true team. They did everything together, practically joined at the hip, unwaveringly following each other's every move. Observing them, I couldn't help but ponder just how powerful a twin bond can become and how it shapes their lives. The girl's mother, Mrs. Ramirez, warmly recalled how she nurtured the friendship between her daughters, wanting Amanda and Anna to forever remain each other's pillars, and the sisters did not disappoint. They learned to walk together, started preschool and school together, shared their most intimate secrets. It seemed nothing in this world could break their mighty sisterly union that only tempered with time. As a detective, I often encounter cases where close bonds between people become a trial for themselves and those around them. So Amanda and Anna's story piqued my interest, not just professionally, but also in understanding human nature. The parents shared that the twins had their own secret language for communicating with each other. At times, it was as if they could read each other's minds, anticipating the other's actions and desires. It was something unfathomable, like a telepathic link that existed only between the two of them. Even at school, teachers marveled at how Amanda and Anna could seamlessly complete each other's answers as one singular entity. This extraordinary sisterly bond inspired awe, but also raised concerns. Would it hinder their individual growth? Could the girls find their place in life alone, without their counterparts' constant presence? These were the questions that nagged not just the parents, but me as well as I delved into the details of this incredible story. Yet in childhood, it all seemed so idyllic. Amanda and Anna were blissfully happy together, and it appeared it would always be that way. They shared their most private dreams, supported each other's pursuits, rejoiced in successes and consoled failures. The sisters were two halves of a whole, unable to envision life without the other. Amanda and Anna grew up in an atmosphere of love, support, and unity. The large Ramirez family did everything in their power to provide the girls with a joyful, carefree childhood. The sisters played together, got into mischief together, attended family celebrations side by side. They adored dressing up in matching dresses and fooling those around them by pretending to be each other. Their parents smiled recounting those moments when even they couldn't tell their own daughters apart. It was a true test for everyone, but also a source of laughter and delight in the Ramirez household. At school, the twin sisters stuck together too. They excelled equally in nearly every subject, often doing each other's homework assignments. Yet teachers didn't scold Amanda and Anna too harshly for such antics, as the sisters demonstrated excellent grades and behavior. According to their school friends, Amanda and Anna operated as a team, always ready to help one another out. Even during tests, the sisters managed to discreetly pass notes with answers. It was something incredible, as if they could read each other's minds. The twins grew into kind-hearted, good-natured, and joyful young women. They easily connected with people and lit up any group. Amanda and Anna dreamed of becoming nurses to help the sick and ailing. And though their family lacked the funds for both daughters' education, their parents vowed to do whatever it took to make their girls' dreams come true. With tears in her eyes, Mrs. Ramirez recounted how she and her husband worked tirelessly to give Amanda and Anna the chance to attend college. It was their shared dream, and they were willing to make any sacrifice for their children's happiness. Amanda and Anna's classmates and friends always remarked on their kindness, sincerity, and willingness to lend a hand. The girls were the true jewels of school life, ever smiling, welcoming, and open to connection. They enthusiastically participated in all kinds of events, from charity fairs to school plays. It seemed nothing could cast a shadow over their happy childhood and carefree adolescence. Yet life brings not just joys and triumphs, but obstacles too that must be overcome. For Amanda and Anna, the trial came in the form of their father's illness. Mr. Ramirez fell gravely sick, leaving the family in dire straits. But even in those dark times, the sisters never lost hope, supporting each other every step. They banded together even tighter, striving to help their mother and ease their father's suffering. This period became a true test of their spiritual fortitude and sisterly bonds' resilience. But that carefree childhood passed quickly, and the sisters had to grow up. Anna was the first to marry her beloved Louis and give birth to 3 wonderful children. She became a doting mother who spared no effort for her little ones. At the same time, Anna completed nursing courses and began working as a licensed nurse. Patients and colleagues adored Anna for her kindness, warmth, and willingness to help at a moment's notice. As her co-workers recounted, Anna was a true angel in the hospital, always smiling, compassionate, and tireless. She had a knack for lifting every patient's spirits, finding the right words of solace and support. Anna worked hard to secure a bright future for her kids. Yet despite her busyness, she always made time for her large family, especially her beloved sister Amanda. Anna often visited her parents, sisters, and brothers. Chatting with Amanda nearly every day, the girls would talk for hours on the phone, sharing experiences and supporting each other. Even distance and life's troubles couldn't weaken their special bond. It seemed to only grow stronger over the years, helping the sisters overcome any hardship. Unlike her sister, Amanda was in no rush to marry. She too completed nursing courses and began working at the same hospital as Anna. The girls were together again like in childhood, now saving lives side by side. Colleagues joked that with nurses like the Ramirez sisters, any patient would recover in no time, as they were a true guardian angel team. Like Anna, Amanda was always ready to lend a hand, uplift with a kind word and sincere smile. Patients adored her warmth and compassion, while colleagues respected her professionalism and dedication. In her free time, Amanda often visited her sister to play with her nieces and nephews and catch up with Anna. The sisters could spend hours in the kitchen over cups of coffee, reminiscing about childhood and discussing their girlhood dreams. They laughed until they cried, recounting hilarious tales from the past, and cried sharing each other's pains and disappointments. These moments of sisterly closeness were the most precious for them, for it was in those instances that they truly felt happy and needed by one another. Amanda too dreamed of getting married and having children, so she actively helped Anna care for her babies, gaining first-hand experience in motherhood. The first years of Anna's eldest daughter's life unfolded under the watchful eyes of her loving mother and doting Aunt Amanda. This allowed the sisters to bond even tighter and preserve their special connection. And for Amanda, caring for her niece became an invaluable school for future parenthood. She joyfully played with, fed, bathed, and doted on the little one. Anna joked that with such a great helper, she could have 10 kids, and Anna herself was in dire need of her twins' assistance juggling 3 young children plus work. The young mother could barely keep up with all her duties. Amanda tried to be there, offering her shoulder in the toughest moments. She visited her sister every weekend, helped with cleaning, cooked delicious meals so Anna could get some rest. The sisters strolled through parks with the kids, went shopping, discussed their girly secrets. These were moments of true happiness and unity when it seemed the whole world revolved around their small yet mighty family. Eventually, Amanda got a boyfriend and unexpectedly became pregnant. It was a real surprise for both sisters, but they knew they'd tackle any challenge together. Now it was Anna's turn to fully support her sister, sharing wisdom and advice. The girls jointly prepared for the arrival of their parents' first grandchild and Amanda's firstborn. They spent hours picking out baby items, setting up the nursery, dreaming of what he would be like. Amanda's pregnancy was not an easy one, with severe morning sickness and swelling. But Anna was always by her side, ready to help and encourage her sister. She drove Amanda to all her medical checkups, monitored her well-being, ensured she ate properly and didn't overexert herself. Anna understood how crucial it was for Amanda to feel protected and needed during this difficult time. And then that long-awaited day finally arrived. Little Alex, Amanda's firstborn and Anna's nephew, entered the world. The sisters couldn't get enough of the tiny bundle who resembled them both so much. Together they cared for, bathed, and lulled the baby to sleep. Alex became yet another proof of their inseparable bond, one more thread tying their fates tightly together. Motherhood transformed Amanda, making her more responsible and wise. Now she understood her sister's anxieties and joys even better. The girls could spend hours discussing childhood antics, exchanging parenting tips, dreaming of their kids' futures. They knew their children would grow up just as close and loving as they were. Over the years, the children grew while Amanda and Anna's sisterly bond only strengthened further. They continued to be each other's pillars, sharing every joy and sorrow. Their kids too grew up together like siblings, inheriting their mother's love and devotion to family. Despite the demands of motherhood, the sisters still found time to cut loose. Amanda and Anna loved partying and living it up with friends. They often hit the clubs together, dancing until dawn. Among their crew, the twins radiated wild energy, positivity, and some magical aura of unity. The Ramirez sisters seemed to read each other's minds, understanding every half-uttered word, laughing at inside jokes only they shared. On June 22, 2019, Amanda and Anna went out partying again. At that point, they were 27, with Anna raising 3 young kids, while Amanda had recently given birth to her first daughter and was battling postpartum depression. But despite the exhaustion and responsibilities, the sisters decided to let loose and dance like old times. The girls first had fun at a club with friends. Around midnight, the group headed to their cousin's place. There, the sisters continued drinking, laughing, and snapping carefree selfies. In one photo posted to social media around 5 a.m., the beaming twins posed with drinks in hand, the caption reading they were feeling those positive vibrations. Little did anyone know then that this picture would become the sisters' final living image. As the detective who investigated this case, I understand how precious every moment spent with loved ones truly is. That photo became a symbol of just how fragile human life can be and how crucial it is to savor every instant while we can. In that snapshot, Amanda and Anna look carefree and joyful, blissfully unaware of the tragedy looming just ahead. Around 5:30 a.m., tragedy struck. It was at that moment that Anna suffered a deep stab wound to her chest and collapsed bleeding onto the sidewalk outside her cousin's home. The police received a frantic 911 call around 5:40 a.m. from Amanda. The terrified woman pleaded for help, screaming that her sister was injured and bleeding profusely. Before medics and cops arrived, Anna was still breathing but soon lost consciousness from the trauma and blood loss. An ambulance rushed the victim to the nearest medical center. Doctors fought for nearly an hour to save Anna's life, but at 6:20 a.m. they pronounced her dead. The severe stab wound proved fatal. The mother of 3 had perished in the arms of medical staff. This tragic event came as a true shock to the Ramirez family and all who knew Anna. The horrific news of her death spread like wildfire through the small town, leaving a trail of unanswered questions in its wake. No one could believe that this joyful, loving woman had left this world so young under such mysterious circumstances. For Amanda, losing her sister was the hardest blow of all. In an instant, she lost her closest kin whom she'd walked through life side by side with. The pain of this loss was unbearable. The realization that Anna was gone for good seeming like a waking nightmare to escape from. But the harsh reality was that Anna had truly passed, forever changing the lives of her loved ones. Now the Ramirez family would have to find a way to keep living without her, raise her children, remember her with love and sorrow. And Amanda would have to grow accustomed to never being able to hug her sister, seek her advice, or simply sit in silent sisterly company again. Anna's death left a whirlwind of questions unanswered. What had happened that fateful night? Who could have wished harm upon this kind-hearted woman? Was it an accident or intentional crime? The answers still needed to be found, and that became the primary mission for the police and detectives investigating the case. But whatever the official findings, for Anna's loved ones, she would forever remain a loving daughter, sister, mother, and friend. Her bright spirit would live on in their hearts, her memory providing warmth in the darkest hours. The shocking news of Anna's death left the entire Ramirez family stunned. No one could believe that some madman had inflicted a fatal wound upon the young mother in the middle of the street. After all, Anna was a kind, compassionate girl with no enemies or ill wishes, no run-ins with the law. So who could have dealt with a nurse so brutally? A blind coincidence or someone from her inner circle? Amanda's behavior immediately raised many questions for the police. Her clothing was covered in stains of her dead sister's blood, while her hands bore fresh cuts characteristic of a struggle over a knife. Moreover, neighbors claimed to have heard a loud argument between the sisters, but no male voices. These details compelled investigators to pay special attention to Amanda and her possible involvement in the tragedy. At first, Amanda refused to let the officers into her cousin's apartment, insisting she had just accidentally cut herself. But the bloody footprints on the floor and blood-stained kitchen knife in the sink made detectives suspect a complex case of family violence. The woman was taken in for questioning, where she would have to explain her behavior and recount everything that happened that fateful night. During interrogation, Amanda acted strangely and ambiguously. She oscillated between crying and pleading for belief in her innocence, then abruptly shutting down and refusing to answer questions. She claimed not to remember many details due to alcohol intoxication, that she and her sister had argued over something trivial, followed by a blackout. Such testimony only strengthened investigators' suspicions about Amanda's role in the murder. Other party guests confirmed the sisters had indeed quarreled before Anna stormed out alone. But no one could say precisely what happened next and how she sustained her fatal injury. Forensics showed the knife used to kill the woman belonged to the owners of the apartment where the party took place. However, no fingerprints were found, and the sister's cousin swore he wasn't involved in the crime. This tangled case became a true challenge for detectives. On one hand, all evidence pointed to Anna's killer being someone in her inner circle, possibly even her own sister. But on the other, the motive for such a brutal crime remained unclear. After all, the Ramirez sisters had always been renowned for their inseparability and genuine love for each other. Who and why would want to shatter that special bond? As the investigation dragged on, the Ramirez family tried to recover from the horrific tragedy. They couldn't fathom Amanda intentionally harming her own flesh and blood, offering her unconditional support. But lingering doubts and unanswered questions tormented them. Why was Amanda acting so strangely? What really transpired that night? And would they ever uncover the truth about Anna's death? These questions haunted Anna's loved ones and friends. They understood the answers could prove too painful and shocking. Yet they also knew without the truth they couldn't truly move forward, couldn't properly bid Anna farewell and find solace. Initially, Amanda tried convincing the police she had simply found her already injured sister on the sidewalk. She claimed to have approached Anna, attempted to stop the bleeding, and gotten covered in blood herself in the process. Then, scared, she ran to the apartment to await the ambulance. But this version poorly aligned with the defensive cuts on Amanda's hands that immediately raised investigators' suspicions she was hiding something. They began scrutinizing her testimony more thoroughly. The woman quickly realized she wasn't being believed and changed her story. Now she insisted that she and Anna had been drinking at their cousin's place when they abruptly got into an argument, even resulting in Anna slapping her. Afterwards, Anna left the home while Amanda stayed behind with their cousin. 45 minutes later, she went outside and discovered her sister's bloodied body. This account seemed more plausible, yet still left many questions unanswered. Investigators tried determining what exactly the sisters had quarreled over and whether it could have motivated a murder. But Amanda kept altering her statements, getting muddled in the details, unable to clearly explain what happened. At times she claimed not remembering the conflict's cause, then suddenly recalling minor insults that supposedly escalated into a physical fight. Such inconsistent, contradictory testimony only deepened detective suspicions about Amanda's involvement in the crime. They suspected she was concealing something, perhaps trying to cover for herself or someone else, but proving it was no easy feat with no direct evidence against Amanda, while her statements continually changed. Interviewing other witnesses didn't clarify matters either. The sister's cousin corroborated they had fought, but insisted hearing and seeing nothing suspicious. Neighbors reported loud shouts and scuffling noises, but none could pinpoint precisely who exited the building and when. Investigators found themselves at a dead end. All signs pointed to a crime of passion, yet the motive and circumstances remained baffling, and Amanda's convoluted statements only further muddied the waters. Meanwhile, the Ramirez family grieved their terrible tragedy. They couldn't fathom Anna being gone, desperately searching for answers. Parents and relatives tried supporting Amanda, believing her innocence, yet tortured by lingering doubts. Why was she acting so strangely? What really happened that night? And would they ever uncover the truth? For Amanda, the situation became a true ordeal. She had to live daily with the burden of guilt and suspicion, respond to uncomfortable questions from detectives and kin, reliving that horrific moment she claimed to have discovered her sister's body again and again. And though the woman maintained her non-involvement, her own memories and feelings grew increasingly tangled, tormenting her every waking moment. Would Amanda be able to prove her innocence? Could the investigation unravel this complex knot of contradictory testimonies and find the real killer? And what price would the Ramirez family have to pay for the truth about Anna's death? Amanda claimed not to remember the reasons for arguing with her sister. She had drunk too much that night. She then recounted how, after being slapped, something seemed to short-circuit in her head. She blacked out, only coming to while standing over bloodied Anna with a knife in hand. Terrified, she tossed the knife in the sink and called an ambulance. The woman wept bitterly, begging to be believed that she hadn't wanted her little sister dead. Her testimony rang sincere, yet raised many questions and doubts for investigators. Detectives concluded Amanda was holding something back. It was doubtful a simple quarrel after 27 years of an ideal sisterly bond could escalate into such a bloody attack. Those mysterious lapses in memory also raised major skepticism. Police suspected Amanda had long harbored resentment towards her sister that came bursting out in a drunken rage with a knife. They began carefully examining the sister's past, searching for possible triggers for conflict. The fact that the woman had struck Anna with one precise blow to the heart indicated premeditated intent to kill. and her attempt to shift blame onto some abstract assailant only worsened the situation. The family denied any serious conflicts between the sisters. Their cousin corroborated the fight, but admitted not knowing what had provoked the argument between the twins. Without this key information, investigators knew unraveling the truth would prove difficult. The defensive cuts on Amanda's hands seemed to confirm her account of struggling over the knife. But if events unfolded as she claimed, why brandish a deadly weapon during a tiff with her sister in the first place? And why not immediately call an ambulance instead of returning to the apartment? These lingering questions tormented detectives striving to reconstruct the night's fateful events. Amanda couldn't answer those questions. She insisted remembering precious little from that evening, too intoxicated and ravaged by postpartum depression. But despite her tears and pleas for belief, police remained convinced something horrific had transpired between the sisters that morning Amanda wasn't divulging. Whatever it was had culminated in one sister's death with a knife in the other's grip, and now investigators had to determine whether it was tragic accident or premeditated murder. As the probe dragged on, the Ramirez family struggled to find solace and understand what had befallen their girls. They couldn't fathom Amanda intentionally harming the sister she'd been inseparable from her whole life. Yet gnawing doubts and speculations tormented them. Was Amanda concealing some terrible secret? Had that secret ignited the fatal fight, and would they ever know the truth? Meanwhile, Amanda herself, broken by grief and despair, strove to prove her innocence. She replayed that night's events in her mind over and over, but memories remained jumbled and fragmented. The woman couldn't comprehend how she could have caused her beloved sister's death, even accidentally, and the blackouts only compounded her confusion and fear. Could she truly be repressing something unaware herself? Police continued gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses, hoping to find the key to unraveling this chilling tale. They understood any detail could prove pivotal, any testimony could shed light on that fateful night. Yet the more they uncovered, the more tangled the case became, and the harder it was to believe Amanda could have intentionally taken her twin sister's life. This tragedy became an ordeal not just for the Ramirez family, but for all who knew Amanda and Anna. People struggled to comprehend how such a loving, close-knit clan could find themselves at the epicenter of such a horrific story, and the suspicions and rumors only salted the already raw wounds. The media pounced on the news, further complicating detectives' work. As a practicing detective myself, I understand the immense pressure public scrutiny exerts, making it even harder to focus on the job at hand. The investigation had reached a dead end when suddenly an anonymous call came through to the police hotline. The unknown caller claimed Anna had been murdered by her own sister out of jealousy. This version was later corroborated by the victim's aunt, who alleged Amanda had been secretly carrying on an affair with Anna's husband, exploiting her uncanny resemblance to her twin. When Anna uncovered this liaison, she apparently accused her sister of treacherous betrayal in a heated rage. This bombshell information became a true sensation, compelling detectives to view the case from a new angle. The aunt insisted she had overheard Amanda boasting to a friend about her adulterous tryst with Anna's husband, mockingly adding how her dimwit sister remained oblivious. This theory could explain Amanda's strange behavior, adamantly denying the fight's trigger. If the woman had indeed seduced her brother-in-law, she likely wouldn't want to admit to such a shameful act. Investigators began scrutinizing interpersonal dynamics within the Ramirez family more closely, seeking confirmation of this scandalous hypothesis. However, all other relatives, friends, and especially Anna's husband unanimously dismissed rumors of a love triangle. They maintained the twins loved each other above all else, while Anna adored her Louis and would never have betrayed him. Suspicions of infidelity struck the kin as absurd and outrageous, completely inconsistent with the deceased's bride image. They couldn't fathom Amanda so treacherously deceiving her lifelong inseparable sister. Amanda and Anna's 19-year-old younger sister Monica swore under oath that the twins simply couldn't have betrayed one another that way, bound by a profound spiritual connection. The girl testified that Anna had been dating Louis for years, while Amanda had her own longtime boyfriend whom she had a daughter with and planned to marry. So there was no incentive for an affair with her brother-in-law, Monica insisted. Her testimony cast doubt on the love triangle theory, compelling a search for alternative motives. When police notified Amanda of her sister's death, she allegedly flew into hysterics. According to Monica, who was on the phone with Amanda in that moment, her sister wept so inconsolably and begged for belief that her tears clearly stemmed from genuine anguish rather than a treacherous deceiver's feigned remorse. The family continued maintaining the police investigation files amounted to unfounded speculation and slander. They couldn't accept Amanda being capable of such a horrific crime. Investigators found themselves in a difficult position. On one hand, the jealousy-fueled love triangle seemed plausible, potentially explaining Amanda's bizarre conduct. But on the other, testimony from the sisters' loved ones directly contradicted this narrative. Plus, no hard evidence of an affair could be uncovered. An anonymous call and the aunt's hearsay provided far too flimsy a basis for premeditated murder charges. In my opinion, this love triangle is pure nonsense, pardon my bluntness. But if you have your own theory, feel free to share it with me in the comments. I'd be happy to discuss it further. Meanwhile, Amanda's defense insisted on her innocence. Her attorneys argued all evidence against their client amounted to circumstantial contradictions. They urged the court not to fall for provocations and conjecture, but rely solely on facts and common sense. The defenders stressed that Amanda and Anna were not just sisters, but best friends who would never betray each other. The case garnered increasing publicity, drawing intense public and media scrutiny. Public opinion diverged. Some believed in Amanda's innocence and sympathized with the Ramirez family's plight, while others remained convinced of her guilt, demanding harsh punishment. This trial became a true ordeal for all participants, especially Amanda, fighting not just for her freedom, but to preserve her sister's honor and good name. In September 2019, Amanda entered into a plea deal with prosecutors. She admitted that under the influence of alcohol and postpartum depression, she had unconsciously, in a state of passion, stabbed her sister with a knife. The woman insisted she harbored no malicious intent and bitterly regretted her actions, having essentially ruined 2 lives, her own and her beloved sister's. Her confession came as a shock to all who had followed this high-profile case. During the trial, Amanda wept bitterly, begging God and everyone present for forgiveness, calling herself the vilest creature while pleading for a chance to return. She stated she would now carry the cross of remorse and the pain of irreparable loss until the end of her days. The court's sentence paled in comparison to the eternal pains of conscience she claimed. Her words moved those in the courtroom, yet could not bring the deceased Anna back. The judge ruled Anna's killing an intentional crime, but took into account Amanda's sincere remorse and extenuating circumstances. She was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment with possibility of parole after serving 5 years. Amanda broke down sobbing upon hearing the sentence, imploring the heavens and all around to forgive her most grievous sin. She understood this punishment amounted to only a fraction of the guilt she would bear for life. After the trial, the victims' relatives stated they harbored no ill will towards Amanda and accepted her remorse. Amanda and Anna's mother took custody of her grandchildren, while the rest of the family vowed to support the imprisoned woman's young daughter until her release. The Kim believed Amanda had sincerely repented and deserved a chance at atonement. They held faith that in time they could forgive her and restore family ties for the children's sake and Anna's memory. Such a chilling story, colleagues. As difficult as it is to admit, it was drinking and unbridled emotion that ruined the lives of 2 young women, 2 families, depriving 5 children of a mother's love. And the core mystery, what truly sparked that fatal burst of rage, continues to be debated by police, attorneys, journalists to this day. The official investigation failed to provide a definitive answer. Amanda's loved ones view her an innocent victim of tragic circumstance, while law enforcement leans towards a theory of premeditated murder driven by jealousy. Proving or disproving a clandestine liaison between Amanda and her brother-in-law is now impossible. The woman adamantly denies any such subtext to the fight, while Anna's husband categorically rejects even hypothetical possibility of such events transpiring. This secret, it seems, will be forever buried alongside Ada. Yet despite all the speculation and uncomfortable questions, one sad fact alone remains certain: a young mother of 2 infants ended her 27-year-old twin sister's life with a single knife blow and now bitterly regrets her actions. And the bereaved Ramirez family will take a long time recovering from the consequences of that dreadful night of June 22, 2019. They will have to learn to live with this pain and Anna's memory, raise her children, and build a new life without her. This tragedy serves as a grave lesson for us all. A lesson in how fragile and vulnerable human life truly is, how easily it can be shattered in one fateful instant, and that neither family bonds nor love can shield us from horrific mistakes and irreversible loss. Amanda must now carry the burden of guilt and remorse for her crime for the rest of her days. While we outside observers can only sympathize with her shattered fate and pray such tragedies never repeat themselves. The story of Amanda and Anna Ramirez is more than just a criminal chronicle, it's a true human drama. A drama about 2 ruined lives, about love twisted into hatred, and about the remorse that may perhaps lead to atonement. And although justice has been served and the guilty punished, this story will continue aching in the hearts of all who know it for a long time to come. For there is no greater pain than losing a loved one,
especially when that loss results from a fatal mistake by someone close.
On February 19, 2001, at the Battlebridge Basin, a part of the Regent's Canal in London, 10 body parts belonging to an unidentified woman were discovered. The body parts were found in 6 different bags and weighed down with bricks. Who was she, and who killed her? These hastily dismembered remains belonged to an ex-girlfriend of John Sweeney, a jealous, perpetually drunken, and vengeful sadist. He referred to himself as a scalp hunter, but the press dubbed him the Canal Killer. Born John Patrick Sweeney on Saturday, October 13, 1956, the boy grew up in Kirkdale, a working-class district of Liverpool. Sweeney's childhood was unremarkable and devoid of significant events. Although his family was poor, his parents instilled in him a sense of pride, moral values, and the importance of hard work. The boy dreamed of studying art, but he was convinced to choose a more reliable profession. Thus, after training as a carpenter, for 5 years John traveled to different countries, working on construction sites with a bag full of tools, pockets full of cash, and eyes fixed on women. It was during this little-known episode of his life that something changed in John. When he returned to Britain several years later, he came back as an envious, jealous, and malicious person whose life was consumed by a passion for alcohol, illicit substances, and violence. Upon returning to Liverpool, John still looked like the boy who had left a few years earlier, with his tousled red hair and mischievous sparks in his eyes. But his almost childlike face, which always seemed kind and smiling, concealed a growing rage within him. After meeting the lovely Anne Bramley in 1976, John married her and moved in with her. Soon after, they had children. However, it was not a happy union. John was either absent from home and uninvolved in raising the children, or he behaved aggressively and horrifically abused his wife. He often used different aliases such as Joe Johnson, Joe Carroll, or Liverpool Joe to hide the increasing number of charges against him for various offences. In 1979, after 3 years of marriage, concerned for the safety of her children and repeatedly reporting her husband to the police, Anne made a courageous decision and filed for divorce. 2 years later, she gave John one last chance, believing that he had changed, overcome his addiction, and that a bright future awaited them. But her husband had not changed. He was still intoxicated, drugged, and dangerous, and he was consumed by a desire for revenge. He was not going to allow her to leave him again. Their second marriage lasted barely a year. Anne escaped to her family in the middle of the night. But no matter how far she ran or how carefully she hid, John always found her. In November 1982, settling with her children in a cottage in a small town, Anne thought she had found refuge, but her peace was shattered because John Sweeney followed her. In the evening, when a piercing wind blew from the hills, covering the moon with dense clouds, and the snow crunched under his feet, John approached the new home of the family. Through a gap in the curtains, he noticed a light in the house but heard no sound and saw no movement. Realizing that nobody was home, the man broke the lock on the back door. Inside, seeing food on the table, children's toys on the floor, and family photos on the fireplace mantel, he felt even more acutely rejected by Anne. John slipped into the darkness of his wife's bedroom, opened the closet, and hid inside. And while he stood there, surrounded by familiar things, inhaling the scent of her perfume, surrounded by everything that reminded him of her departure, John waited for his wife's return with a hammer in one hand and an axe in the other. He didn't have to wait long. Just 2 minutes later, he heard the jingling of her keys. The front door opened, and light sequentially filled each room until he heard quiet footsteps in the bedroom. From the tension, the man's finger joints turned pale as he anxiously gripped the hammer and axe, prepared for a furious attack on his soon-to-be ex-wife. Waiting for the perfect moment, John burst out of the closet and saw 2 police officers in front of him, thick, strong guys who already had handcuffs ready. John dropped the weapons, and thoughts raced through his mind about how to explain who he was and what he was doing in the closet with a hammer and axe. He claimed he was preparing a surprise for his wife. One can only guess what kind of surprise it would have been if the police officers hadn't shown up. However, luckily for Anne and the children, they were having a pleasant evening at the neighbor's house when they heard the sound as if someone had entered their home. Assuming it was a burglar, they called the police. John was arrested, but he was not charged with attempted murder or anything similar. Since it is difficult to prove intentions to commit a crime, and considering that everything happened in what could formally be considered his own home, the law couldn't do anything to him. He was released on the condition of staying away from Anne. John started over and moved to London. He returned to Liverpool only to visit his mother. Although he and Anne crossed paths more than once, they managed to maintain civilized relations for the sake of the children until her death in 2001. In the same year, 10 body parts, placed in 6 separate bags and weighted down with bricks, were dumped at the Battlebridge Basin Canal in London. But the body in the canal did not belong to Anne. John never again attempted to take her life. Perhaps he never had the opportunity again, perhaps he still loved her, or perhaps he knew it was wrong to deprive the children of a caring mother. Thus, with the same fury in his eyes, jealousy in his heart, and impatient tremor in his hands, John set off once again in search of love, an unsuspecting girl whom he would attempt to control, and her name was Melissa Halstead. But this time, he turned to his other passion, art, and his dark paintings would unveil the veil of mystery over his much more sinister plans. Born in Ohio, Melissa Halstead was a bright, courageous, and cheerful girl whose free-spirited nature was balanced by kindness and inner warmth. Melissa always saw the best in people, and although it took her a long time to trust a stranger enough to become her friend, once you became her friend, you became her friend forever. At the age of 15, scouts from the renowned Ford modeling agency in New York took notice of the beautiful and striking girl, and that's where her career began. She traveled across America, Europe, and Asia. By 1986, after a successful modeling career and obtaining education as a makeup artist and photographer, Melissa settled in London in anticipation of a new chapter in her life. Melissa hardly told her family anything about her new boyfriend, whom everyone called Liverpool Joe. Whatever she saw in this red-haired, moody figure was a mystery to everyone, but whatever it wasn't worth it. Because the man didn't hesitate to disfigure her beautiful face, using his fists in fits of drunken rage. These were alarming signs, and Melissa repeatedly tried to leave. Over the course of 12 months of living together, Melissa and John Sweeney, the police were called to her rescue twice when he brutally beat her. But both times, John only received a slap on the wrist, forcing him to pay a fine of £5. In April 1988, the man frightened poor Melissa so much, waving a knife, that in a gruesome foreshadowing of her fate, she told her sister that if she ever disappeared, it meant John had killed her. This time, the court banned him from ever approaching the girl. Melissa's work visa was about to expire, and she continued to travel thousands of kilometers away from John, visiting Austria, France, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. But no matter how far she went, how skillfully she hid, or how cautiously she noticed traces, he always found her. His paranoia fueled by alcohol, his jealousy fueled by rejection, and the court conditions that had no significance beyond Britain allowed him to track down his supposedly unfaithful girlfriend to her new apartment in Vienna, Austria. Without realizing that the shattered relationship was his fault, and driven mad by the thought that Melissa was cheating on him, John burst into the house through the back door, found and gagged her neighbor, and searched the apartment. He examined every cabinet in search of signs of her infidelity. Melissa had learned from the experiences of his furious attacks. She knew there was no point in arguing, trying to convince him otherwise, or even dignifying him with a response. Instead, understanding that he needed time to cool down, she bought him a ticket to Amsterdam. Whether it was a clever ploy to distract a dangerous lover, a kind gesture to give him a chance to calm down, or an honest promise to resume their relationship is unknown, but it worked. John took the ticket and left. But a few days did not calm him down. On the contrary, He blamed Melissa for everything he had ever experienced because of women who deceived and rejected him. She rejected him like Anne, abandoned him like Anne, and destroyed him like Anne. John's anger came full circle, and it was time to finish what he had started, to seek revenge. On Friday, November 4th, 1988, 4 days later and almost 6 years after the failed attack on Anne, John approached Melissa's apartment. Unlike that night, Melissa was at home. Unlike that night, he didn't break in but knocked on the door. Unlike that night, when Melissa saw her stalker had returned, an argument ensued. But just like that night 6 years ago in Anne's cottage, John was prepared. The knuckles of his right hand turned white with impatience as he clenched a hammer. He told Melissa that he had calmed down and simply forgot something in her apartment. Waiting for the moment when Melissa turned her back to him, John gritted his teeth, his hand shot up, and he brought down the steel edge of the hammer on the girl's head. Melissa felt a powerful blow, and her vision instantly darkened, but miraculously she survived. Lying in a hospital bed with bruises and a brain fracture, she declared that all she wanted was to help him, but now she understood that he truly hated her. John was arrested on the same day. Hatred for the girl continued to boil in him while in prison. In his troubles, he blamed only her. And here he resorted to his favorite pastime again, drawing. His drawings were not only frightening, realistic, and highly detailed, but they also served as a confession of the thoughts and desires that consumed him. His imagination was so deranged that it's hard to describe it in words. The most disturbing sketch he sarcastically titled Romantic Weekend 2 in Austria. But if it could be characterized in any way, it was certainly not romantic. However, Melissa knew nothing about the drawings. She believed his tears and assurances that she was all he had, so she took an unexpected step. The judge sentenced John to 12 months in prison and a 10-year ban on entering Austria to protect his victim from any danger. But he was released earlier after an emotional plea from the person he almost killed, Melissa. And on Monday, March 27, 1989, after serving only half of his sentence, 34-year-old John Sweeney walked free, inhaling the fresh Austrian air as the cold breeze played with his red beard. The stunningly beautiful Blom, a former model, kissed him on the lips. Melissa arrived in a car full of luggage to pick up John. They headed to the Netherlands, where they wouldn't be bothered by the deportation order, to start a new life together. However, those 6 months in prison did nothing to rid the man of his drinking habit, his use of illicit substances, his paranoia, jealousy, and his obsession with violence and torture. And their new home was as libertine and indulgent as it was an unsuitable place for someone like him. Although John occasionally worked, his earnings were only enough for alcohol, and it was Melissa's successful career that allowed them to pay for housing, food, and other expenses. Month after month, the beatings were repeated, which the girl concealed behind expertly applied makeup and poorly thought-out excuses. Thanks to her work as a photographer and makeup artist, she traveled a lot, but the more she was absent, the more John drank and filled himself with jealousy and rage. Finally, in late April 1990, Melissa returned home to Amsterdam, to the apartment she shared with her boyfriend. She decided to break up with him for good. On Thursday, May 3, 1990, in a coastal town called Rotterdam, located 50 miles from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, a military-style bag appeared on the surface of a canal. Upon seeing it, 2 police officers decided it was either stolen luggage or discarded trash. Inside, they found the torso of a naked woman. Just the torso, without hands, feet, or a head, and there were no belongings or documents present. The perpetrator had removed them and snapped the unfortunate victim's spine in half to fit her into the bag. She had spent just over a week in the water before being discovered. However, that was all the police could determine for certain because the killer had made maximum efforts to destroy all clues to her identity. The skull injury from a recent attack by her boyfriend could have provided a clue to her identity besides dental records, but all the police had was an unnamed torso, lacking any name, teeth, surgical scars, birthmarks, tattoos, or fingerprints. Since no missing persons matching her description had been reported in Rotterdam, Melissa was marked as Jane Doe and buried in an unmarked grave in a local cemetery. We will never know exactly how or where she died. We do not know how her killer transported her body from Amsterdam to Rotterdam. Perhaps he took a train, wondering what other passengers would think if they knew what was in his bag. But we do know that in Rotterdam, he chose a canal that ran through the heart of the city, waited for the opportune moment, and simply tossed the bag into the water. As Melissa worked a lot and traveled on assignments, her family in Ohio did not immediately realize they hadn't heard from her in a while. The last time she left a message on the answering machine, congratulating her mother on her birthday, and then she stopped calling. So in November 1990, the family hired a lawyer to investigate her disappearance. But they realized it too late. Her apartment was completely empty and meticulously cleaned, with no trace of the former tenants. Melissa had vanished, and John returned to Britain, embarking on his search for love, girls, once again. And her name was Delia Baymer. Having met John at a pub in early 1991, Delia was struck by the charisma of a man who lived a seemingly heavenly life. Being overly trusting by nature, she quickly allowed John to move into her apartment, just 1.5 miles from the Battlebridge Basin Canal in London's Paddington. But together they appeared to be a strange pair. She was a fragile blonde, a nurse who saved lives, and he was a red-haired psychopath with one past murder, one attempted murder, and at least one future murder. Delia brought warmth and coziness into the home, while John complemented it with illicit substances, alcohol, a tarantula, stacks of horror magazines, and a collection of gruesome paintings depicting scenes of violence, severed body parts, blood, torture, and headless female bodies. As before, he quickly revealed his true nature, striving to exert full control over Delia's life and exploding with rage if things didn't go the way he wanted. 2 years later, Delia gathered the courage to ask him to leave. He agreed, but he kept delaying the moment, continuing to exert control over every aspect of her life. In 1994, Delia managed to escape his watchful gaze and spent a day with a friend. When she returned, John flew into a rage. As punishment, he tied the helpless woman to her bed, using the same rope he had once used to bind Melissa's lifeless body. For unbearable 48 hours, he tortured Delia, repeatedly violating her, beating her, strangling her, and threatening her. John held a gun to her head and threatened to cut out her tongue with a kitchen knife if she screamed. In his frenzy, he began to tell her the story of his previous girlfriend, who had tried to leave him and supposedly met her end in the canals of Rotterdam. Allegedly, he caught her with 2 Germans. He killed all 3, not knowing what to do with them. He sat with the bodies for 3 days. On the 3rd day, he dismembered them, packed them into bags, and threw them into the canal. Delia had studied John well and didn't even attempt to argue, curse, resist, or scream. She didn't even allow herself to think about it, as if he could read her thoughts. Perhaps that's why, like Anne, he didn't kill her. And no one knows why. The man fled to Germany, but since the police knew his appearance and the fake names he used, he was arrested and deported back to Britain. Her tormentor sat in prison, but Delia was convinced that he would find a way to get to her sooner or later. On Thursday, December 26, 1994, 3 days before Christmas, John was put under house arrest. Just a few hours later, as the sun was setting, with a cold winter wind and snowflakes falling from the sky, Delia finished her shift and carefully rode her bicycle onto the road leading to her home. The dark street was empty, illuminated only by the flickering lights of television screens, Christmas garlands, and the dim orange glow of street lamps. Delia leaned her bicycle against the fence near the steps that led to her apartment entrance. It was quiet, peaceful, and safe, or so it seemed. As always, she propped the door with a brick and went back to get her bicycle. Delia was already halfway up the steps, looking around, asking herself if he was hiding in the darkness, when she glanced to the right again and saw his enraged face. Without wasting a second, Delia quickly pushed the brick allowing the door of her house to slam shut right in front of her. She knew it was better to confront John on the street. If he pushed her into the house, she wouldn't stand a chance to escape. With raised hands, bulging eyes, and clenched teeth, John struck the fragile and defenseless woman with a 2-kilogram axe while reaching for a knife. He hit her in the chest, piercing her lung, then her thigh, and swung the axe, severing the tip of his finger. Delia could have died, but she didn't. She pulled the bicycle towards her to shield herself from the blows. The sound of the axe scraping against the metal of the bicycle was heard by her neighbor, Giles Allen. Grabbing a baseball bat, he rushed out of his house and chased after John on the street. But John quickly vanished into the darkness, being the coward that he was, afraid to confront a worthy opponent, someone like himself. For the next 6 years, while John remained on the run, friends warned Delia to be cautious, believing that he would come back to finish what he started. But Delia didn't care anymore because she was no longer herself. And even though, after 6 years, 10 parts of a woman's body, carefully packed into 6 different bags, would be discovered at Battlebridge Basin, a London dock in the Regent's Canal, bearing a striking resemblance to Melissa's murder, Delia Bamer would not be the victim. That woman was still alive, because she still had to become John Sweeney's future ex-girlfriend. Having gone on the run, John didn't make much effort to lay low. He headed north, where he visited his mother, as well as his ex-wife Anne and their children. On January 2, 1995, just 11 days after the attack on Delia, John sent a letter to the police and Scotland Yard, boasting about his crimes and claiming they would never catch him. Since the red-haired butcher was easy to find, he decided to hide in another European country. He disappeared from all radars for 6 years. What happened to him during those years, where he was, what he did, and whom he possibly killed, remains unknown. The only certainty is that he returned to his gruesome drawings, promising brutal retribution against women who dared reject him. However, in early 2000, he came back to Britain, where he resumed his search for love. And her name was Paula Fields. As one of 11 children in a poor family living in the poorest district of Liverpool, Paula's childhood, along with her brothers and sisters, was challenging, but their troubles were only beginning. When Paula was 9 years old, her mother passed away, and the children were sent to relatives or placed in shelters. As she grew older, Paula tried her best to become a great mother to her own children. That's why she decided to move to London in search of a better life for her 3 sons, but things only got worse. After 2 years of constant hunger, suffering, and despair, she turned to the oldest profession. In the autumn of 2000, as a homeless woman of loose morals, with no chance of regaining custody of her children, who had been taken by Child Protective Services, Paula's life seemed to hit rock bottom. It was during this time that she met and fell in love with a bearded, red-haired butcher known as Liverpool Joe. Paula, battered and beaten, moved in with him. But what began as an endless cycle of emotional blackmail, psychological pressure, and physical violence soon led to her demise. At 9:30 a.m. on Friday, December 15, 2000, Paula was last seen entering John's apartment. Just 2 days later, the true nature of her beloved was revealed, and 2 days before he moved out of the rented flat, Paula was never seen alive again. On Monday, February 19, 2001, during the school holidays, 2 school children were fishing at the Battlebridge Basin when they noticed a partially submerged black bag. Being boys, they retrieved the heavy bag, hoping to find treasures or at least stolen valuable items. They were shocked for the rest of their lives when they opened the bag and found bricks and body parts. The police recovered 5 more similar bags from the water, but they did not find any hands, feet, heads, or any items or documents. Like Melissa, Paula could have become another Jane Doe, as John had once again gotten away with murder. Or he would have, if he hadn't made a huge mistake. He left one victim alive. Since the police became aware that the wanted assailant for the attack on Delia Bamer had been seen in London, all constables received his description. On Friday, March 23, 2001, the red-haired butcher Joe Johnson was spotted at a construction site. Knowing that he might be armed, the police added their most prepared officers. He indeed had a knife and a gun in his locker. In his apartment, they found more weapons, ammunition, machetes, a homemade bamboo garrote, a baseball bat, a wig with brunette hair, a change of clothes, an axe, handcuffs, garbage bags, a bag with saws and hammers, and over 200 drawings and poems depicting torture, dismemberment, and the death of women. For the attempted murder of Delia, John was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And although he boasted about many murders of his former girlfriends, as well as presumably 2 Germans whom he allegedly caught in bed with Melissa, without evidence, the law was powerless, and investigators feared that John would be released early from prison in a few years and simply disappear. But then another victim of John provided an important clue that helped remove the dangerous criminal from the streets forever. And she did it from beyond the grave. On June 12, 2007, thanks to the advancement of genetic technology, the Dutch police obtained the DNA of the woman whose torso was pulled out of the Rotterdam Canal 18 years ago. By joining forces, Scotland Yard and the Dutch police not only identified Melissa and Paula but also linked their murders, the method of disposing of the bodies, and the identity of the killer, John Swine. In court, the most reliable and crucial evidence against the defendant became his own paintings and poems. Detectives were able to establish a chilling connection between the drawings and the murders he was suspected of. In particular, on one drawing, investigators noticed an element hidden under correction fluid. Under ultraviolet light, forensic experts were able to see what was drawn there. It turned out to be a tombstone with the inscription, "Rest in peace, Melissa." But why would he hide this fragment of the painting if he considered all his works simply art? Because it was evidence he knew about Melissa's death long before her remains were identified. Another painting titled "Beautiful Night" in Vienna depicted an army bag with something inside. It was in such a bag that Melissa was found. However, clues were provided not only by John's paintings. 2 poems represented something like a biographical description of his relationship with Melissa, and 2 hinted or even explicitly spoke of the girl's death. For example, one poem ended with the line, "When I die, perhaps we will become one whole," meaning that she had died, and he knew it for sure. Although the press dubbed John Swine as the Canal Killer, he considered himself a scalp hunter as he signed one of his works, an image of a man with a bloodied axe and a scalp with light hair. The hair most likely belonged to Delia, whom he dedicated the piece to, so to speak, wishing her to depart from life in the most painful way possible. The paintings depicting the murder of Paula were no less disturbing, and he continued to paint her even in prison. Although he was never tried for other murders, the police believe that John's drawings may contain clues to the identities of other victims, particularly 2 women whom the police have never been able to find. They did not find the other body parts of Melissa and Paula. Delia believes that John could have hidden them within the walls of the buildings he worked on as a carpenter. At least, that's what he did with his pet tarantula. On Monday, April 4, 2011, 54-year-old John was found guilty of the murders of Melissa and Paula. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Such a punishment is extremely rare in Britain, but the judge emphasized that Sweeney is too dangerous to ever be released again. It all started right where it ended, at St. Malachy's Church in Tyrone, Northern Ireland. In December 2010, beauty queen and teacher Michaela Hart and sports star John McCrime tied the knot, sharing their celebration with over 300 guests. However, just 3 weeks later, John returned with the body of his young wife, who was buried in her pristine wedding gown. What led to Michaela's death? Who could be so heartless and calculated as to take the life of a woman who had just begun to enjoy married life with her beloved? And will the collaborative efforts of multiple countries help uncover one of the most memorable and harrowing crimes of recent years? The captain of the Irish football team, John McCrime, and the daughter of one of the country's top football managers, Michaela Hart, met at university in 2005. It was love at first sight, and since then, the young couple had never been apart. During a vacation in Paris, John proposed to Michaela, and she happily accepted. They planned their wedding for New Year's Eve, on Michaela's 27th birthday. After the ceremonial wedding, the newlyweds boarded a plane, embarking on their 3-week honeymoon. They spent the first week in Dubai before the most anticipated part of their trip began, 2 weeks at the 5-star Legends Hotel, located in the fishing village of Grand Gauba on the northeast coast of Mauritius. Michaela chose Mauritius as their paradise island for the dreamy honeymoon and carefully researched local hotels. They settled on Legends Hotel due to its numerous positive reviews and popularity among tourists from Ireland. Upon arrival at the hotel, they asked the receptionist if they could be allocated one of their best rooms. They were informed that there was a vacant room in the luxury block, room 1025. January 10, 2011, after having breakfast together, John decided to play golf while Michaela sunbathed. They met again for lunch. Michaela always enjoyed having tea with something delicious after lunch. She asked her husband to order tea while she went to the room to get Kit Kat bars with her favorite dark chocolate, which she had brought from Dubai and kept in the refrigerator. John offered to bring the treats for her, but it was only 150 steps from the restaurant to the room, so she went by herself. John took some photos and watched videos while waiting for his wife to return. After some time, he began to wonder why Michaela hadn't come back yet. He decided to look for her. Knocking on the door, John received no response. Since he had forgotten his key in the room, he peeked through the window but couldn't see anything, so he went to the receptionist. The corridor attendant led him back to the room and opened the door with his key. However, as soon as the corridor attendant took a few steps away from the door, he heard the cries of a man asking for immediate help. Upon entering the room, John discovered his wife in the bathtub filled with cold water. Bruises were visible on her neck, her skin was icy to the touch, and her lips had turned blue. Assuming that Michaela had intended to take a bath due to back pain but slipped or lost consciousness, John attempted to help her. However, his efforts were in vain. Within an hour, medical professionals pronounced Michaela's death, bringing an end to the dreams of a young and happy married couple. Presumably, due to the initial assumption of an unfortunate accident, nobody attempted to secure the crime scene, and people constantly entered and exited the newlyweds' room. The police were initially informed that a tourist had drowned, but upon entering the room and observing the state of Michaela's body and the disorder in the room, they suspected a murder had taken place. The distraught husband was taken to the police station and held for questioning for 5 hours. This was not unusual since most murders are committed by individuals close to the victims. What was abnormal in John's case was the cruelty and inappropriateness of the statements made by the police officers. Naturally, John couldn't hide his tears over the loss of Michaela. Just half an hour earlier, he had seen his wife happily walking towards their room, but now he discovered her lifeless body in the bathtub. However, upon seeing his tears, a police officer, perhaps trying to console him, said, "Why are you crying? You're still young. You'll find yourself a new wife." It is unknown how long they would have kept John at the station if it hadn't been for the hotel manager's intervention. The manager informed the police that the door of room 1025 had been opened with a stolen master key that fit all the locks. It became evident that the murder had been committed by someone from the hotel staff. It was likely an unintentional murder. Someone among the staff, possibly a security guard with access to the master key, entered the room at 2:42 p.m. 2 minutes later, Michaela opened her own door. The thief, possibly hiding in a small niche in the bathroom, had to quickly consider his options due to the unexpected presence of the maid. If his duties involved room cleaning, he could have simply smiled at Michaela, pretended to do his job, and nothing would have happened because it's a common situation in a hotel. However, if he was a security guard, He knew that his presence in the room would not be easily explainable. So, the only option he saw for himself was to hide in the bathroom and hope that the woman would simply leave. But that didn't happen. As investigators speculated, Michaela decided to take advantage of the opportunity and entered the bathroom. Inside, she encountered the thief. Michaela got scared and ran, and the thief, in panic, attacked her. Realizing that he had killed Michaela, he placed her in the bathtub. Perhaps he tried to create the appearance of an accidental incident with the maid. Despite the shock, he may have also thought that water would wash away any DNA evidence left on his victim. When John got up from the table at 3:05 p.m. and went to check why his wife was taking so long, the killer was still in the room. If John had his keycard with him, he could have caught the killer at the scene of the crime. However, by the time he went to the administrator, asked for the door to be opened, and entered the room, it was already 3:26 p.m., and the thief, unintentionally turned murderer, had vanished. Releasing John put the police under immense pressure. When a tourist is killed in a country that heavily relies on tourism, it becomes crucial to quickly solve the case. It seemed like the case would be solved promptly because the local police chief stated that the island had a 100% homicide clearance rate. One might think he was just acknowledging the efforts of his subordinates, but any professional would be suspicious considering that in 2011, besides Michaela, 30 other people were killed on the island, and all cases, except Michaela's, were solved based on confessions from suspects. The following year, the police once again solved all cases based on confessions. The fact that the police excessively relied on instinct and intuition, if it can be called that, could have been compensated by the fact that the investigators had an ideal crime scene. The hotel room was clean every day. Each entry into the room was recorded by the security system. Surveillance cameras were placed everywhere, and the hotel itself was practically an impregnable fortress, with vigilant security guards everywhere. As it will become clear shortly, that was not the case at all. Within 2 days of the murder, the police arrested several hotel employees, and 2 of them, Avinash Tribhuwan and Sandeep Mania, were charged with the murder while the others reluctantly became key prosecution witnesses. A week later, a hotel security guard named Dasan Narayanan was also arrested. Dasan was on duty on the day of the murder. His exact location at the time of the crime could not be confirmed, but his fingerprints were found on a fake key that the thieves used to replace the stolen universal key in the security room. Dasan couldn't provide a satisfactory explanation for how his DNA ended up on the safe door in the room. He admitted to touching Michaela's cheek when he rushed to help John, offering an explanation in advance for how his DNA could be present if it was found. However, despite Dasan's conflicting statements, the police decided to charge him only with being an accomplice to the thefts, focusing their main efforts on Avinash and Sandeep. On May 22, 2012, the trial began. The prosecution built its case primarily on the confession obtained by the police, following their customary practice. Prosecutors argued that when Michaela returned to the room on that day, she caught Avinash and Sandeep stealing money from the safe or her purse. Since hotel employees are often the main breadwinners for their families, not just immediate relatives, the thieves preferred to silence Michaela to avoid losing their jobs. During the trial, their colleague Raj Thikoy also testified. He was initially arrested but became the key prosecution witness and received immunity. Raj stated that he was near the room and heard the agonized cries of a woman but didn't knock on the door. Instead, he hid and saw the agitated and sweaty Avinash and Sandeep leave the newlyweds' room. Later, he asked what had happened, and they replied, "Nothing happened, just keep quiet. If you say anything, we'll involve you in this matter." In addition to witness testimonies, the prosecutors largely relied on the confession obtained from one of the suspects, Avinash Tribhuwan, following the customary police practices. Despite the fact that Sandeep and Avinash were the accused, it created an impression that the police themselves were being judged alongside them as they conducted a careless investigation. The defense attorneys drew attention to all the evident gaps, inaccuracies, and blatant errors made by the investigators. Firstly, after the discovery of Michaela's body, the hotel was not sealed off, and not a single guest or staff member was interviewed. Some tests were not conducted, while others were only performed after the hotel room was returned to the hotel's control, compromising the evidence. Fingerprints and palm prints were found in the room, but their owners were not identified. However, no DNA evidence indicating the guilt of Sandeep and Avinash was found. Even the paper currency, which according to the prosecutors interested the thieves, was not fingerprinted or examined for DNA. The court also heard that all the crime scene photographs were taken in black and white, and many important items were not photographed at all. But the biggest uproar was caused by the mystery of the 46 surveillance cameras capturing the events inside and around the hotel. Despite numerous requests, the police did not hand over the video recordings to the defense attorneys. It turned out that they did not withhold the footage because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. 90% of the videos were erased by the police officers who were unable to operate the cameras. When asked to demonstrate how the equipment works, instead of honestly answering yes, they simply pressed the button. It happened to be the record button, and when they thought they were playing back the recordings, they were actually erasing them. The glaring incompetence of the police made international media wonder if the local authorities were deliberately sabotaging the investigation. Finally, the accused claims that they only made confessions after being subjected to torture by the police. Dasan Narayanan, who allegedly gave Sandeep the key card, claimed that he was forced to make the confession under threat of a weapon. Avinash also denied his statements, stating that the police tortured him and interrogated him with water, after which he vomited blood. Furthermore, he was allegedly told that his wife would be deported and he would be forced to live in Ireland with John McCrime, who would now need a new spouse. Avinash stated that he didn't even read his own confession because he simply signed the document that was presented to him. Another witness stated that he was forced to give false testimony, even though he and Sandeep were actually in room 1009 at the time of the murder, where a VIP client was supposed to stay, and Sandeep insisted on his subordinate maintaining perfect cleanliness in the room. At one point, he even grabbed the mop himself and demonstrated how the floors should be cleaned. Additionally, Sandeep claimed that he was on the phone with his sister in Britain at the time of the crime, which was corroborated by telecommunications data. Finally, the preserved surveillance camera footage also confirmed that he was in a different part of the hotel at the time of the murder. Overall, the court proceedings, which were expected to last for 2 weeks, dragged on for almost 8 weeks. This was largely due to the defense attorneys crossing the boundaries of decorum and turning the trial into a show. They constantly made jokes and elicited bursts of laughter among the bored onlookers and law students present in the courtroom. The defense raised the issue of there potentially being a sexual motive for the crime, hinting at the involvement of Michaela's husband. They referred to an intimate aid they found in the hotel room and insinuated possible misconduct between John and his wife. However, it turned out to be a simple insert from a women's magazine, Cosmopolitan, which Michaela had purchased at the airport. They then attempted to prove that John and Michaela had a severe argument, presenting a video that allegedly confirmed this. However, the individuals in the video were not Michaela and John, but rather 2 people resembling them from Germany. As a result, John had to contact this man on Facebook and request him to provide a statement at a police station in Germany, confirming that he was the one in the video. Overall, Michaela's family was incredibly distressed by the sensationalism surrounding the case of her murder. In particular, a local newspaper conducted a survey titled "Who Killed Michaela?" and John ended up ranking high on the list of the readers' votes. Additionally, the Mauritian newspaper published by the police the photos of Michaela's naked and bruised body, causing indescribable anguish to her family. Nevertheless, these 8 weeks came to an end, and it was time for the jury members to make their decision. The judge summarized the case, clearly pointing out the guilt of the suspects, leading Michaela's family to believe that it would give the accused the right to demand a review of the case after a guilty verdict. They had no doubt that the verdict would be exactly as they anticipated. Furthermore, the judge strongly advised the jury not to consider the impact this case would have on the country's image, but to make the right decision from their perspective. And after 2 months of trial, deliberating for only 2 hours, the jury declared Avinash and Sandeep innocent. After the acquittal verdict, John and Michaela's families were incredibly disappointed. They endured all the agony of the process, inappropriate remarks from attorneys and police, tolerated laughter in the courtroom, and even faced aggressive behavior from the locals because they were confident that the guilty parties would be punished for the murder. They were certain of Avinash and Sandeep's guilt and believed that they were acquitted because the case received global media attention, and the jurors did not want the murder case to reflect negatively on Mauritius' image. The Hart and McCavery families cannot forget that Avinash's lawyer appeared on a local radio station and essentially admitted his client's guilt, mentioning how Avinash cried and apologized to Michaela's family. The interview was supposed to be presented in court, but the lawyer managed to evade his responsibilities. John believes that Avinash told the truth when he confessed to Michaela's murder, and here's why. When anyone hears about death by strangulation, they imagine the killer choking the victim, gripping their neck with 2 hands. But Avinash recounted that when they were in the honeymoon suite, Michaela walked in and saw him holding a wallet. She asked what he was doing. She couldn't have known that Sandeep was in the bathroom. When the girl tried to prevent Avinash from leaving the room, standing in his way, Sandeep approached her from behind and wrapped one hand around her neck. The thing is, the autopsy report was compiled much later, and it confirmed that everything happened exactly as Avinash described. How could Avinash have invented such a method of strangulation if he didn't know it for sure? Additionally, Avinash mentioned that Michaela hit her head on the floor when she fell. The bruise on the back of her head, found during the autopsy, confirmed that as well. Furthermore, in summarizing the case, the judge reminded everyone that Avinash made his confession on January 12th and signed it on the 13th in the presence of his lawyer. If the police wanted to fabricate the confession, they would have forced Avinash to sign something else on the 12th. Moreover, the boy was examined by 3 doctors on different days, and none of them found any signs of torture on him. After the acquittal verdict, a new investigation was initiated. The police focused on a crucial piece of evidence, the keycard that the thief and murderer used to enter the room. However, even the mechanism of these locks cannot be trusted. The locks are not synchronized, and each of the 240 locks in the Legends Hotel shows its own time on the security systems panel, making it impossible to determine the exact time when the killer entered Michaela's room. As a result, the alibi of practically any suspect is in question because the exact time of the crime is unknown. To make matters worse, another significant loophole was found in the hotel's guest security. This loophole could increase the number of potential suspects from dozens to hundreds. If the hotel owns the guest rooms, restaurants, bars, golf courses and similar areas, the beach is considered public property. According to Mauritian law, the island's beaches belong to the local residents, and fishermen and traders have always had full access to both the beach and the hotel's premises. Local traders sell their crafts to tourists, and young boys are accustomed to spending time on the hotel's grounds. In other words, despite the cameras, gates, and security personnel, the hotel is unable to provide complete protection of its premises, and there is no way to verify who had access to the honeymoon suite. As a result, the new investigation into the case also ended up with no significant breakthroughs. Under international pressure, the Mauritian police revisited Michaela's murder multiple times and even enlisted the services of a French laboratory for retesting DNA samples. In 2014, there was information about a breakthrough in the case when DNA found on Michaela's clothing matched the DNA of one of the suspects. However, this discovery was insufficient to warrant a new trial. In 2017, in an attempt to draw attention back to the case, John announced a substantial reward for information about the case. A few weeks after his return home, he received a call from a lawyer informing him that the arrests of Sandeep and Avinash were now inevitable. The lawyer did not specify the new evidence that made this possible, but Michaela's family felt relieved and believed that they would finally achieve justice. However, weeks and months passed, and no one was arrested. The case was officially closed in 2020, but in 2021, under pressure from Irish politicians, the Mauritian government agreed to reopen the case. The problem lies in the fact that the willingness to re-examine the case does not guarantee that it will be solved. Investigating any murder after 10 years is challenging, let alone considering the possibility that officials in Mauritius may lack the desire to find the killers. Over the course of 10 years, many investigators have climbed the career ladder, and if something is revealed in the case that many would prefer to bury, heads will roll. After the trial, John and Michaela's family filed a lawsuit against the hotel for €1.6 million. They settled the case out of court, and the details of the agreement are not disclosed, but the money went to a foundation established in Michaela's honor. Legends Hotel was renamed Lux Hotel and continues to enjoy immense popularity, as does Room 1025, which underwent renovations and was assigned the new number 1026. John, who now works as an accountant, met a pleasant girl named Cara Brennan at a memorial dinner for Michaela in 2013. Tara, also an accountant, received a marriage proposal from John in 2015. Last year, the couple welcomed their first child, James McCavery. On Thursday, July 19, 1990, residents of Florida, Steve and Jane McGowan, received a letter from their 34-year-old sister, Beverly. She bid them farewell and wrote that she was embarking on a journey to find herself in this world. Beverly added that she was quitting her job and selling her apartment because she intended to leave immediately. The contents of the letter deeply shocked the brother and sister. Beverly had worked hard and was satisfied with both her job and her new home. She had recently acquired the apartment she had dreamed of and worked 2 jobs to pay off the mortgage. Jane hurried to the police station to report her sister's disappearance, but the authorities could do little since the letters stated that Beverly had left of her own accord. The letters were written in Beverly's handwriting on notepad sheets found at her home. So Steve and Jane went home to Beverly in Pompano Beach to try and find answers to their questions. They immediately noticed that Beverly's red Volkswagen Fox was not in its usual parking spot. Beverly herself was not in the apartment, but it did not give the impression that she had packed up and left for good. There were dirty dishes in the sink, a nightshirt lay on the unmade bed, and clothes hung in the closet. However, there were also signs that Beverly had no intention of returning. The phone was disconnected, the answering machine was missing, and there was no sign of her 2 cats. Steve and Jane rummaged through drawers and discovered that Beverly's passport, birth certificate, and address book were also missing. Beverly worked in the loan department of a bank and had a part-time job at a non-profit organization. Steve contacted the bank to see if her colleagues could shed light on the situation. They informed him that the day before he received the farewell letter, Beverly had taken a sick day, citing illness. This was unusual considering Beverly's reputation as a responsible and reliable employee. During the phone call, she also mentioned that she no longer wanted to live in her apartment and asked them to sell the mortgaged property and get rid of her personal belongings left in the apartment. Beverly was asked to send a telegram confirming her request, and such a telegram was indeed received. Although the circumstances were strange, Steve and Jane had to believe that their sister had truly left without explaining herself to anyone. However, Steve managed to convince the police to file a missing person report, and he closed Beverly's credit cards. He reasoned that closing the cards would disrupt her travel plans and anger her enough to compel her to contact the family. On the same evening that Steve and Jane were inspecting their sister's apartment, a fisherman and his young niece went to search for bait for an upcoming fishing trip. They arrived at a wide irrigation canal located 160 kilometers north of Pompano Beach in a remote area of St. Lucie County. Leaving his niece in the car, The fisherman began walking along the canal when he noticed something that appeared to be a bag of trash. As he approached closer and realized what it was, he hurried back to the car and contacted the police. Deputies from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, who arrived at the location indicated by the fisherman, discovered the body of a woman. It was evident that the perpetrator not only took her life, but also made every effort to prevent her from being identified. However, he overlooked something. On the woman's right ankle, hidden beneath her jeans, there was a small tattoo of a yellow rose. The description of the tattoo was released to the media in the hopes that local residents could identify it. Steve McGowan had already returned home when the phone rang around 10 p.m. It was a friend of his missing sister. She had just heard the news about the discovery in the St. Lucie Canal and the matching tattoo that Beverly had. The next day, Steve and Jane went to St. Lucie to speak with investigators and show them a photograph of their sister's tattoo. Due to the condition of the body, traditional identification methods had to be ruled out, but both of them were confident that it was their Beverly. Dental records comparison confirmed that it was indeed her. The inspection of Beverly's apartment did not reveal any blood or suspicious items. There were no signs of a struggle. Steve and Jane couldn't understand who would harm their sister. She loved her family, especially her nephews, and they loved her. Beverly was not wealthy and was not involved in complicated relationships. Her life was overshadowed by the fact that her two boyfriends died in separate car accidents. However, despite her past, Steve was confident that Beverly had been quite content with her life recently. Although Beverly worked 2 jobs, it was not enough to cover her mortgage payments. To increase her income, she started renting out one of the bedrooms in her apartment. During the search of her apartment, investigators found a notebook with a list of potential tenants. Each entry included the full name, phone number, and the scheduled time for viewing the apartment. Except for one. The first line only had the name Alice and was marked for Tuesday at 6:30. After meeting Alice, Beverly spoke highly of her. The woman had come from London, dressed impeccably, drove an impressive car, and worked for the renowned company IBM. Alice had moved to the region because she was temporarily transferred to the company's office in Fort Lauderdale. She had impressed Beverly to the point that she chose her as the new neighbor and informed her friend that Alice would be moving in on Friday, July 20th. By the way, Beverly mentioned that Alice introduced her to numerology. Alice attempted to predict Beverly's future, but she needed various numbers that held significance in Beverly's life, such as her date of birth, passport number, social security number, and even details from her driver's license. Strangely enough, Beverly provided her with all of these numbers. Overall, she was satisfied with Alice's predictions about her future and shared them with her friends. Unfortunately, she did not share the last name of her new neighbor with them. Alice's identity remained a mystery. Additionally, there was no evidence to suggest that Alice had moved in or even visited Beverly's apartment. The investigators reached out to IBM, where they were informed that they had no employees from the UK working in the South Florida area. They didn't even have an office in Fort Lauderdale. The investigation into Beverly's finances revealed that on the day her body was found, someone withdrew $795 out of the $800 that was in her bank account. Her credit card was then used to purchase women's clothing and books at a shopping center in Miami. The salespeople who served the customer described her as a bright blonde with a British accent. The description matched that of a tall blonde woman who had attracted nationwide attention at the time. 8 years earlier, in 1992, police officer Lori Bembinek had been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her ex-husband's former wife. The case had caused a sensation. Lori's glamorous appearance combined with the high-profile nature of the case made her somewhat of a celebrity. A few days before Beverly's murder, Lori had escaped from prison in Wisconsin. When the Miami salesperson was shown photographs of Lori Bembinek, they recognized her as the woman who had used Beverly's credit card. The police were puzzled as to how the convicted killer's path could have crossed with that of a modest bank employee until it was discovered that Laurie had actually fled to Canada and was not in Florida at the time of the crime. However, on Friday, July 20th, one day after Beverly's body was discovered, her card was used again in Miami, this time at a travel agency. The card holder had a notable appearance. It appeared to be a man dressed as a woman. The person wore a cheap black wig in the style of Cleopatra and oval-shaped glasses. The man spoke with a British accent and introduced himself as Sam. Apparently, Sam was planning to fly to London in 2 days, on July 22nd, and used the card to purchase a ticket for British Airways Flight 92. Detectives examined the passenger registration records for Flight 292, as well as all other flights heading to Britain on July 22nd. Beverly McGowan's name was not on any of them. However, Beverly's car was found in the airport parking lot, where it had been parked for 5 days. Fingerprints found inside the car yielded no significant results, but 4 synthetic black wig hairs were discovered. British Airways Flight 292 arrived at Heathrow Airport on Monday, July 23rd, according to London time. After landing, a passenger with short black hair and oval glasses approached the Avis car rental counter. The passenger, presumably Sam, booked a car in Beverly McGowan's name and handed over her driver's license as proof. Beverly had shoulder-length dark hair and wore glasses. The person at the counter resembled her. The clerk asked for a credit card to pay for the car's fuel, and Sam handed over Beverly's Visa card, but the card was declined. Sam explained that they might have exceeded the limit and paid in cash. In reality, by that time, Beverly's brother Steve had cancelled her credit cards. When Florida detectives learned about this unsuccessful transaction, Sam had long disappeared. Since the credit card was no longer active, its transactions could not be traced. Sam's arrival in Britain meant that he was beyond the jurisdiction of American law enforcement agencies. Florida detectives contacted the London police to request their assistance. Detective John Cornish agreed to help with the international investigation. He spoke with the Avis company and instructed their staff to direct the suspect to their nearest office if he contacted them. Later that same week, Sam did contact Avis. He requested an extension on the car rental, and he was asked to visit the nearby Avis office. The police waited for him at the location, but Sam never showed up. A backup plan was devised, where officers would wait at Heathrow Airport on the day of the car's return. That day arrived, but Sam once again failed to appear. In the early morning hours, Sam's abandoned car was found a few miles from the airport, devoid of any clues. Suspecting that Sam might be attempting to fly back to the United States, Detective Cornish ordered his team to board all flights heading to the US on that day to check the passengers, but this endeavor proved futile. The police missed the opportunity to apprehend the criminal. The only lead the police had left was British Airways Flight 292. Since Sam didn't use Beverly's passport to board the flight, it meant he had booked a ticket under a different name. Investigators attempted to examine the 248 passengers on that flight, but by law, they were not allowed to check passengers who didn't reside in Florida. Therefore, they sought assistance from the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. Each passenger's name had to be compared with passport details, and since there was no unified database that consolidated all this information, the process could take years. It wasn't until January 1996 that the State Department provided the police with a name they deemed important. Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson, a British citizen, was on Flight 292. The photo in her passport depicted a woman with dark hair and eyebrows. After her husband's death, she was forced to move into a women's shelter if she had nowhere else to go. Less than a year after her husband's death, a passport was issued in her name. Investigators suspected that someone else had impersonated Sylvia to obtain documents in her name. Since they couldn't locate Sylvia in any way, there was concern that she had suffered a fate similar to Beverly's. The State Department also discovered an intriguing connection between Sylvia and two other women, Charlotte Ray Cowan and Elaine Antoinette Parent. All three identities turned out to be inadvertently linked after an incident that occurred a year after Beverly's murder. On May 22, 1991, North Miami police approached a woman in a rented car. The car had been rented 6 months earlier in Los Angeles and was overdue for return. Stolen license plates were attached to the car to conceal its origin. Inside the car sat a tall, red-haired woman who identified herself as Charlotte Ray Cowan and presented her documents to the officers. It was clear that Charlotte had been staying in the car with 2 dogs. Several wigs, the woman's personal diary, and a number of documents with Charlotte's photograph but different names, Sylvia Hodgkinson and Elaine Parent, were found in the car. The police arrested Charlotte based on her failure to return the rented car. She spent a night in jail and posted bail the next day. Remarkably, despite the woman's obvious use of false identities, the police took no action regarding this matter. On the day of Charlotte's court hearing for the offense, one of the arresting officers was present in the building. When it was time for Charlotte to appear before the court, a red-haired woman stood up. However, the officer who had arrested Charlotte was shocked. The woman summoned to court by the subpoena was not the same woman he had taken into custody. Charlotte herself couldn't understand why she had suddenly received a court summons. She asked the officer if the woman he had arrested was tall and a redhead. When he answered yes, she confidently stated that she knew exactly who it was. Nearly 10 years earlier, in the mid-80s, Charlotte was relaxing at a bar in Orlando when an elegantly dressed woman with a British accent approached her. She had short red hair, like Charlotte, and amazing blue eyes. The woman introduced herself as Anne Trumont and offered to buy Charlotte a drink. Charlotte accepted the offer, and they engaged in casual conversation. During their chat, Anne casually brought up the topic of numerology. She mentioned that she would be happy to create a corresponding matrix for Charlotte and started by asking for her date of birth. One by one, Anne extracted Charlotte's social security number and driver's license details. She jotted everything down on a napkin and gave Charlotte a positive prediction about her future. Anne and Charlotte became instant friends and started communicating. A few days later, Charlotte met Anne's brother, a tall blonde man with the same elegant demeanor as his sister. However, over time, the women saw less of each other until they completely lost touch. So Charlotte was quite surprised when, several months later, Anne called her and said that her aunt had passed away, leaving her a significant inheritance. Anne was supposed to share the money with her brother but claimed that he had decided to have her institutionalized to claim all the money for himself. About a month after the phone call, Anne appeared on Charlotte's doorstep at 3 a.m. She had a moustache, wig, and a man's shirt with a tie. Sobbing, she explained that she had escaped from the institution where her brother had placed her. She was hiding from her family and needed help to disappear. Anne begged Charlotte to allow her to take her birth certificate so that she could create a new identity for herself. Initially, Charlotte refused, but she reluctantly agreed when she saw how distraught Anne was. Her friend promised to return the birth certificate soon. Weeks passed, and Charlotte heard nothing from Anne. She began to worry. Then, finally, she received a letter with the birth certificate and a note from Anne, apologizing for the delay. Charlotte didn't hear anything more about her friend until the moment she received a court summons in 1991. Hearing this fascinating story, the investigators became intrigued by the identity of the elusive and enigmatic fraudster, Elaine Parent. Like others, Parent was a real person, but little was known about her life. She was born in the Bronx, New York, on August 4, 1942. She was the only child of loving and fairly affluent parents. By the time she reached adulthood, she had transformed into a tall, slender beauty with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. At the age of 30, she moved to Florida and worked for a while at a real estate agency until her arrest in 1976 in Fort Lauderdale for shoplifting. Her fingerprints were taken and stored in the database. Then, in 1985, she stole jewelry worth $40,000 from an elderly acquaintance. This was around the same time Parent met Charlotte. Parent's fingerprints were compared to those of the woman arrested in 1991 for failing to return a rented car. They matched. The woman masquerading as Charlotte Coven was Elaine Parent. Naturally, the conclusion was drawn that the new neighbor, Beverly McGowan Ellis, the elusive suspect Sam, and Elaine Parent were one and the same person. However, they still needed to directly link Elaine to Beverly's murder. The detectives reviewed the evidence in the case and examined a notebook containing letters Beverly had written to her brother and sister using an electrostatic detection device, ESDA. This specialized equipment is used to detect indentations or impressions on paper left by previously written letters. The analysis of the notebook revealed that it had been used for a series of other letters written not in Beverly's handwriting. It seemed the author was a woman who held a strong grudge against Beverly. The messages were rather aggressive and contained threats. The letters were compared to handwriting samples from Elaine Parent, and they matched. The letters written by Parent were addressed to a woman in London who held a high-ranking position as the CEO of a major company. For her safety in the case materials, she was referred to as Witness X. She shed light on many gaps in the life of the elusive fraudster. The woman revealed that she had met Elaine during a trip to Miami in the 1980s, and they quickly became friends. In 1985, when the police were searching for Elaine for the jewelry theft, she apparently fled to London and asked Witness X if she could stay with her. However, the two young women soon realized that they couldn't live together due to Elaine's explosive temperament and instability. In 1990, the con artist returned to the United States, but to Witness X's surprise, she returned to London at the end of July. She was driving a car rented from Ives. 3 months after her return to London, Parent stole 2 dogs belonging to her former friend and escaped to the United States. From there, she sent threatening letters to Witness X and attempted to extort a ransom for her dogs. These dogs were evidently the same ones found in her possession during her arrest in Miami in 1991. By the end of 1996, Parent faced charges of passport forgery from the State Department, but they had no idea where she could be hiding. In 1998, the television show America's Most Wanted aired an episode about Elaine Parent. When the show began, Patricia Nevins from St. Petersburg, Florida, was at home watching television. As soon as she saw Elaine's photo, she immediately recognized her. Patricia Nevins was a church worker and knew Elaine as a blonde named Sandra Little. Patricia met Sandra Little in 1992 when she was living in a homeless shelter in St. Petersburg. Patricia allowed Sandra to stay in her vacant bedroom, and she remained with her for almost 1.5 years. During this period, Sandra filed a lawsuit against a restaurant where she slipped and injured herself. She won the case and received compensation, the amount of which is undisclosed. Patricia described several curious incidents that occurred while she lived with Elaine. Elaine once told her that one way for her to lead a dignified life was to assume a different identity. Then, during a dinner party, Parent mimed cutting a guest's hand to steal a gold bracelet. Patricia arranged for Elaine to speak with a psychiatrist, who later informed Patricia that Elaine was an extremely intelligent sociopath who would leave Patricia's life as quickly as she entered it. This prediction came true when the women went their separate ways in 1993. After the police publicly appealed to the community to help capture Elaine, an intriguing letter was delivered to the office of the St. Lucie County Sheriff. Inside was a copy of a painting done in oil colors. It depicted Elaine Parent wearing a teal-green swimsuit and pearl earrings. Her hair was grey and styled in the same manner Parent often chose. She was portrayed coming out of a pool. On the back, it was printed, "Best wishes, your chameleon." Psychiatrist Barbara Cavan, who had been assisting the police in the case, stated that Parent both desperately needed and feared police attention. The painting is very telling. She sent it to the police to taunt them, as if to say, "I'm alive, I'm okay, look for me, but you'll never find me." In February 1999, Elaine was featured in the documentary series World's Most Wanted, which brought her international attention. Reports poured in from around the world claiming to have seen Parent in Turkey, France, Australia, and South Africa. The press dubbed her the most wanted woman in the world. In April 2002, America's Most Wanted aired another episode about Elaine Parent. Following the program, numerous calls came in from the affluent neighborhood of Panama City, Florida, claiming that a woman living there was Elaine. 3 police officers were dispatched to the address. They arrived at a modest single-story house and knocked on the door. A middle-aged brunette woman, dressed in a beige silk pajama set, answered the door. The officers explained why they had come to see her. The woman introduced herself as Darlene Thompson and presented them with her military ID, which featured her photograph. She did not resemble the photograph of Elaine Parent that the officers had seen. Realizing that the neighbors had made a mistake, the officers nevertheless asked her to accompany them to the station for formalities. Darlene agreed and requested that the officers wait while she changed clothes. While the officers waited outside the bedroom, one of them examined Darlene's ID. Being a former military personnel, he immediately noticed a crucial missing stamp that confirmed the document's authenticity. The officer knocked on the bedroom door to clarify this matter, to which she responded that she was getting dressed. The officers waited for her to come out, but she never appeared. A gunshot rang out, and the officers rushed into the bedroom only to find Darlene dead. Subsequent fingerprint analysis officially confirmed that Darlene and Elaine Parent were the same person. It turned out that the house where Elaine lived belonged to another woman. Elaine had been renting a room from her since August 2001. The homeowner described her as a pleasant woman with a passion for cooking. During the search of the house, Elaine's Florida driver's license was found, featuring her photo but under the name of the woman she was staying with. In a notebook, she had written down information about a man from the neighboring town of Lynn Haven, including his social security number and credit cards. Elaine's closet was filled with wigs and both women's and men's clothing. A book on learning the French language and another on theatrical makeup were also discovered. Some acquaintances of Elaine mentioned that she often worked on a laptop, but it was never found. The diary she had with her when she was arrested over 10 years ago as Charlotte Cavan was also missing. Another intriguing detail to the portrait emerged. The police found a flyer with a photograph of Elaine and the name Antonia Racemen. The flyer stated that she was being sought by the FBI for the murder of a government official at a hotel in Washington. Interestingly, it appeared that Elaine had created the flyer herself, and the local police chief later speculated that she had made it to intimidate someone. The death of Elaine left many unanswered questions. The police believe she had up to 20 different identities that she used across the world, including the USA, UK, Turkey, Israel, France, and South Africa. Some suspect that she may have committed more murders, but no additional victims have been found. 3 years prior to her death, investigator Norma Pfeiffer told the media, "The brutality of the Maguire murder makes me think that someone capable of this has either done it before or will do it again." Opinions are divided as to whether she worked alone or had an accomplice. Some argued that she couldn't have managed Beverly on her own. And let's not forget about the attractive blonde man she presented as her brother. Psychologist Barbara Kerwin described Elaine as a virtuoso in her field, capable of effortlessly reading people's souls and uncovering their vulnerable spots. However, the motive behind her crimes remains completely unclear. Why would someone with Elaine's high intellect choose to engage in criminal activities instead of achieving great heights in any other field, especially considering that her crimes brought her more infamy than wealth? But Kerwin believes she knows the reason behind Elaine's schemes. She was driven by her own psychological demons, Barbara stated. "I believe she impulsively stole the identities of others to fill her own emptiness." late spring of 1995. Aurora, 26 years old, and Mark, 32 years old, chose the beautiful Corsican island for their honeymoon. Aurora and Mark got married 2 months ago, and the girl picked this place for their first vacation together. The young wife wanted to explore Corsica, its mountains, villages, and picturesque landscapes. On that day, they stopped in the cozy little town of Calvi. Here, the newlyweds had a candlelit dinner in the harbor at a restaurant overlooking the bay. After dinner, Aurora and Mark headed towards the Notre Dame de la Serra Chapel. It is a popular spot among tourists where lovers go to enjoy the sunset, an ideal place for a romantic end to the day. Later in the evening, around 10:30, they got into the car to return to the hotel. The young couple had to drive on a very dangerous road that sharply descended. And right at the point where the railing ended, some animal suddenly jumped onto the road in front of the car. Mark quickly turned the wheel, and the car went off the cliff. Despite the extreme situation, Aurora didn't panic. She opened the door and jumped out of the car just before it fell. Mark wasn't as fortunate. He plummeted 140 meters along with the car. Aurora was in shock, but she was alive. She made a daring decision. In the middle of the night, in pitch darkness, she descended barefoot to help her husband. Aurora found Mark in the car and pulled him out. She dragged him by the legs towards the sea and washed his face. Then, the girl climbed back up the cliff to stop a passing car and call for help. The firefighters from Calvi 1 arrived at the scene. Aurora was in hysterics, screaming and crying that her husband was down there, with a head injury and unconscious. She begged the rescuers to descend as quickly as possible and save him. The firefighters immediately headed towards the base of the cliff to find Mark, but the darkness of the night and the uneven terrain significantly hindered their search. It took them half an hour just to locate the car. It turned out to be empty. However, they noticed a lot of blood and signs indicating that the man had a severe head injury. After several hours of relentless searching, the exhausted firefighters were ready to give up when, at 6 a.m., divers signaled that they had found something. Mark's body was floating in the water right next to the car at a depth of 3 meters. They brought his body to the surface. Unfortunately, it was too late for the newlywed. The police compiled a report on another unfortunate incident on that stretch of road and closed the case. Mark's body was transported to his native Belgium. The young widow was utterly devastated. She couldn't cope with the grief on her own, and she was hospitalized in a specialized clinic for several days. Mark's relatives rushed to console her, but she shut herself off from the world, declaring that she didn't want to see anyone. Mark's family understood her state of mind and didn't insist. After all, at the age of 26, she had lost her husband during their honeymoon. But in the following days, her behavior intrigued Mark's family more and more. Gradually, concern gave way to suspicion. Aurora insisted on having her husband cremated, but his parents vehemently opposed the idea. On the day of the funeral, she shocked the family even further by leaving the farewell ceremony earlier than expected. Since then, the relationship between her and Mark's family became increasingly complicated. Upon returning to the family home, she changed the locks and didn't even let her mother-in-law, who had come to collect a few of her son's inexpensive but sentimental belongings, inside. In the following weeks, Aurora put the house up for sale. The sale of the house provided her with a sum equivalent to 125,000 euros. But that wasn't all. It turned out she had received 7 insurance payouts after her husband's death. In total, Aurora received 475,000 euros. Shocked by such behavior from their daughter-in-law, the Van Ba couple decided to take legal action and filed a complaint regarding the suspicious death, prompting the coroner to demand an investigation into the circumstances of Mark's death. To understand what actually happened that evening, investigators began by studying the lives of the couple. Approximately a year before the incident, in April 1994, 31-year-old Mark Van Ba was working at a respected financial company in Brussels. He had a wonderful job, loving parents, and friendly colleagues, and it seemed like everything in his life was going well, or almost everything. However, he had not yet met a woman with whom he wanted to spend his life. Mark was at the age when he wanted to start a family. Mark and Aurora met at a bar in Brussels. At that time, Aurora was going from door to door selling ironing boards. It was not a very profitable job. The chemistry between Mark and Aurora was instant. Mark immediately fell in love with the beautiful girl and was crazy about her. The men's friends were envious and amazed by their vibrant relationship. Aurora was very attractive, fit, and sporty, while Mark was slightly overweight, not interested in sports, and quite shy. Yet, just a few weeks after their first meeting, Aurora moved in with Mark. The future husband's family warmly welcomed her, seeing that their son was happy with her and accepting her as their future daughter-in-law and the mother of their grandchildren. No one was surprised when the young couple decided to get married after a year. The girl set several conditions for her future husband, such as asking Mark to put half of the house in her name. This might have seemed unusual or inappropriate, but Mark, deeply in love, agreed to all of the bride's terms. On March 11, 1995, the young couple said yes to each other. The husband's entire family attended the wedding, while only the bride's twin sister was present from her side. Gradually, the husband's family began to notice that their daughter-in-law never talked about her family, evasively answering all questions about her relatives, her past, or her education. She pretended to come from a more privileged family than theirs. On September 5, 1996, more than a year after Mark's death, Aurora was invited to the police station for questioning. She confirmed the statements she had previously made. She and Mark had visited a restaurant in the port and then went to a chapel. On the way back, a wild animal suddenly jumped in front of their car. Mark turned the steering wheel, and an unfortunate accident occurred. Right before the car fell off the cliff, Aurora opened the door and jumped out. The police were unable to extract any further information from her. In an attempt to uncover the truth, Mark's body was exhumed on October 8, 1996. The forensic expert noted that some of the injuries were inflicted post-mortem. Numerous wounds were found on the body, but none were bleeding. This indicates that Mark died before the car fell off the cliff. The police wanted to question the widow again, but could not locate her anywhere. The detectives then decided to investigate the crime scene in Corsica. 2 years after the incident, Belgian police officers found themselves at the edge of the ravine where the newlyweds' car had plunged. Without the car, and armed only with photographs, the task became more challenging. Nonetheless, the expert was able to reconstruct the trajectory of the car before the fall. When something happens on the road, like an animal unexpectedly running out, a person reacts by turning the steering wheel but not by a full 90 degrees. If the car veered off the road, it should have fallen into the water, and under no circumstances could it have ended up where it was found. Additionally, the expert noticed another inconsistency with the accident theory. According to the firefighters who arrived at the scene, the bushes growing on the top of the cliff were crushed. If the car had quickly descended, the bushes would have been severed. The crushed vegetation indicated that the car had stayed on the bushes for some time before slowly rolling down. Furthermore, between the car and the water, after the incident, drops of blood were found that were unevenly distributed, suggesting that the body was carried, not dragged. Could Aurora, weighing less than 50 kilograms, have carried an 80 kilograms man? The findings of the investigation did not align with Aurora's version of events. The experts' conclusions were definitive. The car was pushed off the cliff. Now, the investigators wanted to understand what happened after the incident. Did Aurora descend to help Mark? Did she find the strength and courage to climb down the rocks barefoot? As difficult as it may be to believe, it was possible. Aurora Martin was a champion rock climber, a trained athlete, so the police couldn't easily refute the possibility that she actually descended to help her husband. It was a dead end for them. Still having no news about the young woman, the investigators decided to delve deeper into her past. Who is she really? What secrets does she hide behind her evasive answers? In reality, the girl had a very difficult childhood where there was no place for a loving family or a proper education. When she was 12 years old, her parents divorced and her mother moved to Germany, and the daughter rarely saw her. She lived a carefree life with her father and 2 sisters. Her father was hardly involved in her life, and when the girl turned 18, she left her childhood home with grandiose dreams. Aurora wanted to become a model and participated in beauty contests, but without much success. So, she found work as a hostess in a bar, sometimes working as a model for an escort service. In February 1993, Aurora was 24 years old and lived life to the fullest, leveraging her beauty. One fine day, as usual, she went to a rock climbing club where a fateful encounter awaited her. Peter Schuett. He was rich, young, handsome, and shared her passion for mountaineering. He was 23 and she was 24. It was love at first sight. Next to Peter, Aurora was able to turn the page on her past life. This story seemed too miraculous to be true. Indeed, while investigating Peter's past, the investigators uncovered an unusual fact for a young man of his age. Peter Schuett was a widower. His wife had died under suspicious circumstances. It happened 2 years prior when Peter turned 21 and was serving in the German army stationed in Belgium. Peter enjoyed frequenting clubs, and one evening, while hanging out with friends, he met a young student named Ursula Deschamps. Their romance was fast-paced, and within 3 months, Peter put a ring on her finger. However, Ursula quickly discovered that Peter couldn't be satisfied with just one woman. There were other surprises awaiting her. Ursula found large sums of cash and forged documents at their home. She wanted to report her findings to the police. Tensions grew in their young marriage, and they decided to get a divorce. But on the evening of August 29, 1992, Peter and Ursula got into a convertible and set off on a trip during which Peter was supposed to teach his wife how to drive. It was a strange outing for soon-to-be ex-spouses. Peter was behind the wheel and, as usual, driving very fast. He lost control, and the car plunged into a canal at high speed. Peter managed to escape in time but couldn't save his wife, who drowned along with the car. He recalled that he even touched her hand and couldn't hold onto her to pull her to the surface. Ursula's body was found several days later. The autopsy revealed nothing that would cast doubt on the fact that the girl drowned. The police reconstructed the crime scene, and Peter convincingly demonstrated how he had escaped from the car through the rear window. Ursula's family, however, never believed it was an unfortunate accident. Firstly, it was a convertible, and Peter had never lowered the top before. Secondly, Ursula was an excellent swimmer. According to an expert who later analyzed the case, Ursula had time to escape from the car as drowning doesn't occur instantly but takes around 3 minutes as the water fills the vehicle. However, the Belgian police treated it as an unfortunate accident caused by the negligence of the driver. The young widower was sentenced to 3 months in prison, and the case was closed. 2 cases, 2 crime scenes, and 2 scenarios between which investigators couldn't help but notice coincidences. In both cases, there was a road accident, the driver lost control, and the car ended up in the water. One of the spouses managed to escape from the car in time, while the body of the other was not found in the car.
Now detectives urgently needed to find Aurora and Peter, as they became the main suspects in the case of Mark Van Ber's death. Detectives also suspected Peter of Ursula's murder, but since Peter had served 3 months in connection with that case, it was possible to forget about prosecuting him again for the same crime. Meanwhile, the police learned
Why Ursula probably died and why Peter became so wealthy. After his wife's death, he received an insurance payout equivalent to 115,000 euros. This allowed him to leave the army and seduce the beautiful Aurora. Their romance lasted for a year. But in early 1994, for unknown reasons, The young couple separated. It was during this time that the girl registered with a marriage agency. She described the ideal man as wealthy, with his own apartment, not overweight, and pleasant. April 1994 marked the beginning of her relationship with Mark Vanber. 4 months after their meeting in August 1994, the girl insured Mark. Interestingly, Mark was obviously unaware of this because the documents bore not his signature, but Aurora claimed that his hand was injured, and she signed the documents for him. Soon, an unfortunate incident occurred. Aurora sold the house, received the insurance payout, and disappeared. However,
She didn't stay hidden for long. 2 months after Mark's murder, investigators found her trace in Luxembourg. She opened a bank account to deposit an amount equivalent to 475,000 euros. 2 individuals had access to the account, herself and a certain Peter Schlitt. The two reunited and moved to Miami, Florida.
for almost 2 years, the lovers lived a life of luxury. Luxurious apartments, cars, and a yacht. Until a major French newspaper published an article calling them diabolical lovers and described the suspicions the police had against them. Aurora and Peter became extremely cautious. They changed their appearance and only made calls from telephone booths. They managed to hide for some time until Peter was arrested in a supermarket parking lot. He had around $50,000 with him and offered it to the police in exchange for his release, but they refused. 2 days later, the police arrested Aurora in the apartment where the lovers were hiding. Peter and Aurora did everything possible to avoid extradition. However, on December 3, 1998, they were returned to Belgium. Aurora immediately refused to give any testimony. Peter, on the other hand, spoke a lot, but little of what he said was true. Since they clearly did not want to cooperate with the investigation, the police did not have solid evidence against them. The course of the case changed due to an anonymous phone call. A woman called and revealed that she had information about Mark's murder. Later, the police identified the woman as Fabienne Lefebvre. Fabienne was Aurora's stepmother, but she had recently separated from the girl's father and decided to either seek revenge or clear her conscience. Fabienne claimed that after the tragedy in Corsica, she rushed to the hospital to comfort her stepdaughter. However, she was met by a completely different girl, not grieving at all. According to Fabienne, Aurora confessed everything to her. She stated that Peter was behind it all and that he took care of everything. When Aurora and Mark were driving on the road, Peter and 3 accomplices, his friends from Germany, stopped the car. They beat Mark with baseball bats. According to Fabienne, Mark never knew until the end who betrayed him because he begged the men to spare his wife and let her go. When the beating was over, they put Mark's body in the car and pushed it off a cliff. However, the police failed to find the accomplices or prove their existence because it didn't match Peter's character. Additionally, there were many doubts about the truthfulness of Fabienne's words. Firstly, Fabienne and Aurora had a strained relationship, and secondly, why didn't she go to the police earlier and why did she make an anonymous call? The woman claimed that she was afraid. However, the police were convinced that building a solid case based solely on Fabienne's words was not possible and sought other evidence. In Germany, the police found postcards from Corsica and photographs of the crashed car that went off the cliff in the possession of one of Peter's brothers. They were souvenir snapshots, but the intriguing part was that they were taken 6 months before Mark's murder. Was it a coincidence or careful preparation? Despite the fact that 4 years had passed since the murder, the details of the crime remained a mystery. On June 16, 1999, the police decided to reconstruct the crime scene at the airport. The driver was driving the car at a speed not exceeding 35 kilometers per hour. Aurora was supposed to open the car door wide, as if trying to jump out. She failed to do so, even when the car significantly reduced its speed. She became angry, cried, and had hysterical outbursts, trying to find an explanation for her failure. Peter intervened, attempting to defend Aurora. it is unclear why he was participating in the reconstruction at all, since theoretically he was not present during the crime in Corsica. After this experiment, the investigators were convinced that Mark Vanber did not die as a result of an accident but was murdered. The trial began. The defendant's lawyers proposed a new version of events. Allegedly, Mark suffered a heart attack just before falling from a height. In other words, he died a few seconds before the accident, and therefore all the injuries he sustained afterwards became post-mortem. This was a hypothesis that could undermine the entire theory of prosecution. Even the forensic expert considered it a clever move, but such a version did not correspond to the autopsy results. Furthermore, during the trial, the forensic expert revealed another extremely important detail. Mark hadn't eaten anything for several hours before the crime. He was hungry. The fact that Aurora even lied about the romantic dinner with her husband that evening was the final straw for the jurors. They found both of them guilty. Aurora was sentenced to 15 years and Peter to 20 years. It is unlikely that they served even half of their sentences. They were released long ago. Despite Peter being deported to Germany and Aurora being prohibited from leaving the country, as of 2021, they were still together. Peter found work as a carpenter, and thanks to her fluency in several languages, Aurora works. The most remarkable thing about this case is that Aurora and Peter committed two almost perfect murders. And the second crime would undoubtedly have gone unnoticed if Aurora had been a little more patient and hadn't slammed the door in front of her husband's family. If she had remained the same pleasant girl they knew, she would have calmly left after a few months, and the Vanber family would never have suspected her of anything. Larry Riskin joined the Navy after school, and over the years of service, he achieved the rank of commanding officer in the Navy fleet. He participated in the Persian Gulf War and demonstrated courage and bravery multiple times, but unexpectedly discovered that he was taking orders from a fragile woman. Larry met Sonia Rios at a barbecue. She owned a beauty salon in the city of Lomita, a suburb of Los Angeles. He was immediately attracted to the very beautiful and striking woman, and within a year, Sonia took her husband's family name and became Sonia Riskin. They settled in Sonia's house. Larry was always extremely close to his family, parents, brothers, and especially his younger sister Sherry Jackson. But everything changed with the arrival of Sonia. She did not allow him to see his relatives, inventing various reasons why they couldn't visit them in Washington. The relationship deteriorated to the point that Larry didn't communicate with his sister and brothers for over 10 years. They only heard rumors that he had resigned and found a job as a teacher for children with special needs. His colleagues remember that he loved children and adored his job. However, he confessed that he was unhappy at home. One thing weighed heavily on him. He dreamed of becoming a father. However, Sonia did not want to have children, and being a very beautiful woman, she misled Larry, pretending to be younger than him. In reality, she was 16 years older. Of course, women at that age are still capable of having children, but Larry felt that his chances of fulfilling his dream were diminishing with each passing day. That's why he grasped at the last straw. In Sonia's homeland, the Philippines, he became attached to his wife's brother's grandchildren, Quincy and Jetmark. The parents of the teenagers believed that with Sonia and Larry in the USA, their children would have a better future, so they supported Larry's proposal to adopt them. Sonia did not object, but insisted on taking care of all the legal matters herself. A year passed, 2, 3, but the process of adoption was not progressing. Larry discovered that Sonia was intentionally sabotaging the adoption process. At that moment, it was his last chance to create a complete family, and he was very disappointed. So much so that he demanded a divorce. Sonia agreed, but with one condition. She asked her husband to go to the Philippines and sell her family business, a taxi company, a matter that needed to be resolved immediately. The man agreed, partly because he wanted to see the children, especially since Quincy's 16th birthday was approaching. Surprisingly, Sonia did not go, even though the matter concerned her family and her business. Before his visit to the Philippines, the first in 13 years, Larry visited his relatives in Washington. He was happy to start a new chapter in his life without his wife but with her nephews, whom he still hoped to adopt. Immediately after landing, Larry went to see them. During the birthday party, Larry noticed that the little cousin of the boys had developed an eye infection. He insisted on taking her to the hospital. Someone present made a call to Sonia and informed her that they would be at the hospital. Larry put the girl in the car and, along with Jetmark and a few other adults, they all went to the hospital. After the visit to the doctor, they got back into the Jeep and were about to return home when a motorcycle approached them. One of the two men on the motorcycle started shooting at Larry's head and abdomen. Then the criminals quickly fled the scene. Jetmark tried to help Larry and called for help. He was confident that they would save him since the hospital was only a few steps away. But the boy was mistaken. They couldn't save Larry. He was 43 years old. When Sonia was informed of her husband's murder, she completely lost control. She was shaking all over and needed help from neighbors Nicole and Jim Thompson to calm her down. Nicole called Larry's sister, Sherry, to inform her about what had happened, but unexpectedly, Sherry started blaming Sonia for everything. Nicole and Jim didn't take her words seriously. Not then. However, the next morning, Sonia asked Jim again to come and help her search for documents. When Jim learned that Sonia was looking for her husband's insurance policy, he refused to help her. While Larry's family was preparing for his funeral, his wife was only interested in the insurance. Moreover, Sonia had no intention of attending the funeral. She arranged for her husband to be cremated, and the urn with his ashes remained in the Philippines with one of her relatives. Larry's relatives saw this as another blow from Sonia, but they still held the funeral and prepared a niche in the mausoleum, where they hoped to someday place the urn with his ashes. They hoped that the Philippine police would solve this case, confident that Larry's wife was behind it all. But at that time, they still didn't know, nor could they have known, that there was another mystery in this story, another man, and another murder. It was news that had the impact of a bomb exploding. Larry Riskin was not Sonia's first husband, and the reason why they were no longer together with her first husband was that he was killed in the Philippines 19 years ago. The man's name was Earl John Bordeaux. Earl's family lived in Davenport, Iowa, in the same house where he grew up. He was the pride of the family. Earl joined the Navy during the Vietnam War, but his unit was stationed in the Philippines, where he met an attractive local girl named Sonia, who sang at a nightclub near their base. It was obviously love at first sight because the young couple quickly got married, and a few months later, Earl brought his young wife home to meet his family. However, the happy reunion did not go well. The girl did not please Earl's family. Therefore, after his departure from the Navy, they settled in Southern California. Several years later, Sonia opened a beauty salon, and her husband found work in a bakery. Outwardly, it seemed like a family filled with love and harmony. But in reality, Sonia enjoyed giving orders to her military husband and controlled him as she pleased. They lived together for more than 20 years when Earl finally realized that such a family life and his wife's commands were burdening him. Sonia agreed to divorce. But before that, and here a strange sense of déjà vu arose, the husband needed to go to the Philippines to sell the family taxi motor company. Earl didn't want to go, but his wife was inflexible on this issue, and the man chose not to argue. He pleaded with his younger brother Dennis to go with him, but he couldn't quickly obtain a passport, so Earl went to the Philippines alone. It was a hot August night when Earl's plane landed in Manila. He arrived at the house where his wife's relatives lived around midnight. The man was exhausted from the journey, fell onto the couch, and fell into a deep sleep until he was truly killed. When the police arrived, they found Earl lying in a pool of his own blood. He had been shot. The officers concluded that a robber had entered the house and Earl had interfered, but there were no signs of forced entry, nothing was stolen, and the criminal only fired at Earl. 3 men were immediately arrested and charged with the murder. Later, 2 more were detained. They were all members of Sonia's family. Fresh human blood was found on the shirt and pants of one of Sonia's brothers. There was enough evidence to send the culprits to prison for a long time. But then came a surprise. Since Sonia was the closest relative, according to Philippine law, she was supposed to attend a preliminary hearing in court where charges would be brought against her family members. However, since she didn't show up, the charges were dropped and the case was closed. The local authorities claimed their hands were tied, at least officially. Unofficially, the locals gossip that Sonia paid to make all the problems go away. As they explain it, $1,000, and the witnesses would stay silent and the evidence would disappear. Earl's brother, Dennis, felt guilty because he let his brother go alone, so he constantly called a lawyer in the Philippines, spending thousands of dollars on his own investigation, hoping to make Sonia worried. But instead, he became the target himself. He received around 200 threats over the phone, but he didn't calm down. He reported Sonia to the police and the FBI. As a result, he became the target of the killer. It happened once while he was fishing. The shooter missed, but it didn't end there. Later, the attack happened right near his garage. Dennis informed the FBI about everything, but nothing happened. The Bordeaux case was forgotten until, after 10 years, Dennis learned that Sonia had a second husband, and he suffered the same fate as his brother. Dennis hoped that the renewed interest in Sonia could also revive interest in his brother's case. Concerning Sonia's plans to obtain not only all the property but also her husband's insurance, things didn't go as planned. The insurance company hired a private investigator who quickly discovered that fraud was nothing new for Sonia. She had burned down her beauty salon for insurance purposes, manipulated taxes and receipts. She had been caught twice before, so her name was known to the police. The investigator provided his report to the employer, and the insurance company refused to pay Sonia the insurance money. However, the investigators' work impressed Sherry and her family so much that they hired him to investigate the murders. He quickly found out that Earl's and Larry's murders were similar in that the Sony brothers were involved in both crimes. They, like other family members, were financially dependent on Sonia and were willing to do anything she demanded. Sherry, just like Dennis, handed everything the private investigator found to the FBI, hoping that an investigation would finally begin. However, weeks and months passed and nothing changed. Sonia continued working at her salon as usual. But after the new year, Sherry started receiving emails. The author claimed that Sonia was responsible for Larry's murder and offered to return his sister's ashes. The emails were signed by John Bordeaux. How could that be? Bordeaux was the surname of Sonia's first husband, but Earl John Bordeaux had long been dead. It turns out that Sonia had a son whose existence she kept secret. She gave birth to a boy in the Philippines when she was a very young girl, a teenager. Earl adopted the boy after their wedding. Earl's family knew nothing about him, nor did Larry's family, despite Larry's desperate desire to have children. Nevertheless, Sherry decided to respond to the emails, primarily because she wanted to return Larry's ashes. John asked for $35,000 in return, but the more they corresponded, the more Sherry became afraid of what kind of person he might be. What if he was a fraud or something worse? With each new letter, she realized that he was indeed worse. For an additional fee, he offered another service to kill Sonia, whom Sherry despised. Sherry was frightened, not knowing how to escape this situation and fearing what else might happen. Her fears were not unfounded. On April 27, 2007, in Lamita, the 60-year-old owner of a beauty salon was found murdered. She had been shot, and the killing resembled an execution rather than a random shooting. The victim was Sonia Riskin, known as the Black Widow of Lamita, who was suspected of killing not one, but 2 husbands. She met the same fate as her victims. The arriving police were struck by the meticulous and well-kept nature of the house. It appeared that the owner rarely received visitors during her lifetime, which perfectly matched her character as a reclusive and suspicious woman. It was also interesting to note that there were no signs of forced entry. It seemed that the killer simply entered the house and shot his victim. Her purse remained untouched, along with the cash inside. The neighbors saw nothing. The victim's relatives immediately rushed to the scene, among them her beloved nephew, Eric de la Cruz. Sonia regarded him as her favorite grandson and was proud of him. The young man served on the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier and had just returned home after a tour of Asia. Upon hearing that his beloved aunt had been killed, he immediately informed the police that if something happened to Sonia, John Bordeaux was responsible for it all. John Bordeaux didn't have to be searched for, as he was the one who found Sonia's body and contacted the rescue service. The detectives immediately found the relationship between the son and Mother Strange. There wasn't a single photograph of him in the house, no hint of a son, as if he didn't exist for Sonia. Overall, he seemed like the family outcast, especially compared to Sonia's favorite, Eric. John explained that although he and his mother sometimes couldn't find common ground and didn't communicate, the situation had improved recently, and he would never harm her. When asked who he believed could have committed the murder, he could only mention Sherry, Larry's sister. After all, she genuinely hated Sonia, as did Dennis. The FBI questioned both of them, but they had alibis. Moreover, no one was as devastated by Sonia's death as these two. They hoped Sonia would pay for her terrible actions by going to prison, so the detectives turned their attention back to John. The electronic emails signed with his name didn't work in his favor. Furthermore, he failed the polygraph test. Even his own relatives considered him the murderer. Allegedly, no one else had the motive, opportunity, and means to commit the crime, but he insisted on his innocence and stood his ground. Therefore, the detectives didn't rush to arrest him, and they were rewarded with a clue from the Black Widow herself. A few days before Sonia's death, she contacted the police to report two strange incidents at her beauty salon. The first time, a young man appeared at her hairdressing salon wanting a haircut. He called her from the parking lot, and Sonia saw him through the window. She became suspicious because he had a short, military-style haircut. It was clear he didn't need a haircut, so she told him that she only served regular clients, which he wasn't. It seemed like the incident was resolved, but 2 days later, the same guy returned to the salon and this time acting more aggressively. He opened fire on Sonia, causing her to panic and call the police. She informed the officers that she didn't know the shooter, but she remembered he had called her 2 days ago. The cautious woman recorded his number. It belonged to a certain Fernando Romero. Romero himself had disappeared, but the detectives only needed a warrant to access the history of his calls. They expected the phone to lead them to John Bordeaux, but no, his number wasn't listed. Instead, they found the number of someone they knew well. A person who had communicated with Fernando not once or twice, but frequently, especially in the hours before and after the murder. The number belonged to Sonia's beloved nephew, Eric de la Cruz. Further on, after a week, the news reached the FBI. Specialists were investigating the IP addresses from which the supposed letters from John Bordeaux were sent. All of them led to Asia, Hong Kong, Korea. These addresses belonged to naval bases. The FBI employees knew that Eric and Romero were two sailors who served on an aircraft carrier. It was likely that they knew each other. Could these young individuals have planned the murder while being on an American military ship? The FBI investigated the location of the ship during the time the emails were sent. It was in ports in Hong Kong, Japan, and South Korea at the same time the letters were sent. However, sending letters is one thing, but why would Eric kill a woman who cared for him better than his own son? Sonia was killed late in the evening on Friday, and on Monday morning, even before the office opened, Eric was already waiting for her lawyer. He wanted to know how much money he would inherit from his beloved aunt. However, Sonia had another card hidden up her sleeve. Eric didn't receive a cent. All her money, homes, cars, absolutely all of Sonia's belongings were left to her son, Jean Bordeaux. But the young man had another harsh blow awaiting him. It turned out that all this time, while he believed he was the main suspect of the police, Jean Bordeaux was being misled. And when the investigators simply presented him with a photograph of Fernando Romero, Eric lost his ability to speak. Choking on surprise and stumbling over his words, he blurted out that he had conducted his own investigation and Fernando had nothing to do with it. He must have realized that Fernando was the thread leading the investigation back to himself. Both young individuals were arrested and charged with the murder of Sonia Riskin. The police apologized to John for pressuring him. He was still frightened after what he had to endure, but he understood that the detectives were just doing their job. In February 2011, the trial began. Fernando and Eric were tried together. The prosecution faced a difficult task. The victim of the murder herself was suspected of orchestrating the killings of two husbands. The accused, the young sailors, could elicit sympathy and comparison. The prosecutor decided to be honest with the jury. He portrayed her as a cold-blooded killer deserving punishment, but now it was necessary to punish the defendants who not only killed a woman but also attempted to frame her son. It worked. The jury found the two guilty. They were sentenced to imprisonment ranging from 26 years to life. It was an astonishing family. They eliminated anyone in their path for financial gain. Sonia and her brothers killed Earl. Sonia and her brothers killed Larry. And Eric killed his beloved aunt. How many murders can there be in one family if it's not a Game of Thrones? The irony lies in the fact that Sonia killed two people who did nothing wrong and were always kind to her. Eric killed a person who had always been kind to him for the sake of money he never received. The Black Widow of Lamata truly reaped what she sowed. In 2019, Sherry went to the Philippines to personally try to find Larry's remains. She could only ascertain that the remains were passed from one relative to another under Eric's orders. In the end, her search led her to a house that had obviously been vacant for a long time. She couldn't fulfill her dream of returning with her brother's urn to their homeland. November 4th, 1989. A quiet night in the fashionable district of Daytona Beach, Florida. Only the lights on the porch illuminate the extravagant mansions, whose occupants have long gone to sleep. Suddenly, the silence of the night was shattered by police sirens after a desperate call was received at the rescue service at 4:54 from the Fotopoulos family's house. In the bedroom on the second floor, officers found a man holding his wounded wife to his chest. Another man lay motionless in a pool of blood on the floor. Members of the small but influential Greek community in the city, Costa and Lisa Fotopoulos, along with Lisa's mother and brother, lived in a huge white mansion on the banks of the Halifax River. The officers were met by Lisa's brother, who led them to the bedroom on the second floor. 26-year-old Lisa Fotopoulos was alive but in agony. She had been shot, and the bullet had entered her head, although hope was not yet lost as it had not penetrated her brain. It struck her forehead, deflected off a bone, and came to a rest just above her left eye. While it was still a gunshot wound, and the medics couldn't know the extent of the damage until she was examined at the hospital, they believed she had a chance to survive. They rushed her to the hospital as quickly as possible. As for the young man lying on the floor, there was nothing that could be done for him. Costa had shot the intruder who attacked his wife, emptying the entire magazine into him. While Lisa was being rushed to the hospital and newspapers competed to write about the hero who shot the robber. Saving his wife and family, the police began investigating the botched robbery. However, it didn't take long for suspicions to arise among the investigators. On the first floor of the house, they found a broken window, indicating the intruder had entered through it. But the window was too small for a sturdy man to fit through without cutting himself. It was also too far from the door handle to open it in such a manner, Furthermore, despite the presence of crystal, silverware, electronics, and artwork in the house, the stranger hadn't touched anything and went straight to the bedroom where he shot Lisa. This raises the question of why her instead of first eliminating the main threat, the husband. Even before morning arrived, the investigators decided to take a closer look at this case and at Lisa's husband. Konstantinos or Kostafotopoulos grew up in Athens, Greece, in a wonderful family. His father held a prominent position as one of the directors of the Greek airline. Since childhood, Costa dreamed of moving to the United States, where he believed a better life awaited him, a life filled with sports cars, big houses, and beautiful women. At the age of 18, he enrolled in Daytona University, where he studied aviation management. To cover his expenses, he worked as a waiter in a restaurant. It was there that he was introduced to Lisa. Even in the modern world, traditional values still hold importance, and every Greek family in the USA wants to marry their child to someone from Greece, a person with the same faith and cultural heritage. Costa seemed to be the ambitious and intelligent Greek guy that parents wanted to see as Lisa's husband. The young woman was captivated by the charm of this young man. He too was impressed, but not by her beauty or intelligence, but by the state of her family. Within a few months, the couple became engaged, followed by a joyous Greek wedding. Costa and Lisa appeared to be an ideal couple. After a few years, Lisa's father passed away, leaving her and her brother in charge of the family business, a theme park and several souvenir shops. Costa worked for her mother, and her brother for $300 a week. It was a decent amount for those times, but not a fortune. Soon, Costa decided to start his own business, something he could fully control. The man took money from his wife and opened a billiard club. For a long time, Lisa had no idea how things were going at the bar and that her husband preferred to hire young kids who, for various reasons, ended up on the streets. Costa surrounded himself with teenagers who were unable to say no to him. He enjoyed portraying himself as a powerful, successful man and would tell the young people that he worked for the CIA, carrying out various government missions. And if any of the kids had doubts about the truthfulness of Costa's words, he had evidence. Framed and hanging on the office wall was a letter from the CIA addressed to Costa. However, if someone bothered to read the letter, they would discover that it was simply a job rejection. Fortunately for Costa, the teenagers believed him unquestioningly, and for them, it was 100% proof that their boss was a secret agent. Things reached a point where Costa invited his business partner, Tony Calderoni, on one of his nocturnal outings. Tony, who didn't believe his friend's tall tales, decided to join him out of curiosity. As a result, he watched with suspicion as Costa, dressed head to toe in camouflage, buried a bag with weapons and money in the woods. The bar trapped Costa in a debt hole. He already owed $20,000, but still continued to enjoy life, playing the role of a super agent. Then, on a beautiful day in 1989, his life became even better after meeting the luxurious 20-year-old Deidre Hunt, who entered his establishment in search of work. Costa was captivated by the beauty of the girl, and soon a romance ensued between them. They didn't care about the 10-year age difference or the fact that Costa was married. Deidre turned out to be the complete opposite of Lisa. Lisa was a true lady, while Deidre was a forbidden fruit, full of passion and desire, something that Costa wasn't getting at home. In turn, he became a source of admiration and expensive gifts for her, providing everything she was lacking in life. Deidre grew up in poverty. She didn't know her father, and her mother suffered from several mental disorders, including multiple personalities, specifically 11 different personalities. The girl never knew what awaited her at home when she returned from school, whether her mother would beat her or shower her with affection. And she had no choice because it was her mother. When Deidre was 7 years old, a neighbor began to harass her, abusing her when she was 11 and he was 31. Instead of support, she only received indifference from her mother. The woman didn't work, spending all the money on alcohol. The situation was worsened by the fact that Deidre had to wear orthopedic braces on her legs to walk properly, and her classmates, sensing Deidre's vulnerability, bullied the ugly duckling. However, everything changed after a few years. She no longer needed the braces, and the girl transformed into a beauty, dark hair, dark eyes, and an attractive figure. She began to receive a lot of attention from men. For Deidre, who had never heard a kind word at her address, it was a kind of drug. She indulged in it fully. At the age of 18, she got involved with a bad crowd and was arrested for armed robbery. After her release, the girl decided to start afresh, and in September 1989, she set off to Daytona Beach, where she could get lost among many street youths. But Deidre didn't get lost. She had charisma and beauty. She quickly became one of the highlights of the bar, strolling around in a black bikini and captivating the regulars. Deidre's difficult childhood and arrest didn't deter Costa. On the contrary, he saw in her a vulnerable girl whom he could manipulate, just like other teenagers hanging out in the bar. Costa rented an apartment for Deidre 2 blocks away from her work so they could meet at any time. And out of habit, he fed the naive girl stories about his work for the CIA and how he had killed 8 people and so on. Of course, Lisa quickly discovered that her husband was seeing the waitress. She followed him to the rented apartment, confirmed the truth, and demanded that he end the affair. However, he stubbornly denied everything. Then the proud Greek woman threatened to divorce him. Costa couldn't allow that because in the case of a divorce, he would not only be left penniless but also burdened with debts. Interestingly, this conversation took place just a few weeks before an unknown person attempted a nighttime visit to their home. Costa told the police that on the evening of November 4th, he and his wife were watching movies late into the night before going to sleep. The next thing he remembered was waking up to a deafening sound. Opening his eyes, he saw the silhouette of an armed man looming over his wife. Almost instinctively, he grabbed the weapon he kept for self-defense, rolled onto the floor, and emptied the entire magazine at the intruder. Miraculously, the bullet had narrowly missed Lisa's brain, and she not only quickly regained consciousness but also was able to speak. She confirmed her husband's account of them going to bed late and waking up in pain when he was talking on the phone with emergency services. However, Lisa added a few other interesting details. She saw her husband burying a black sports bag in the backyard earlier that evening for some unknown reason. Furthermore, she recounted an incident that had occurred at her workplace just a week ago when someone had tried to rob her. A young man held a weapon to her and attempted to force her into a small office space. She managed to fall to the floor and crawl between his legs, escaping from him. Fortunately, he didn't pursue her. As detectives listened to her account, they couldn't shake the thought that it might have been an attempt on Lisa Fotopoulos' life, incident number 1. So, who was the unfortunate intruder who broke into their home? It turned out to be an 18-year-old named Brian L. Chase. His father stated that his son had been missing for a while, getting involved with a bad crowd that frequented Costa Fotopoulos' bar. As the media buzzed about the incident, the news reached the teenagers who frequented Co-Star's bar. A phone call came into the police, altering the course of the investigation. The call was from a 20-year-old named Newman Taylor. Taylor believed that the police would find it interesting to know that if Brian Chase was the one who died, he had been hired to kill the woman. Taylor was a friend of Deirdre, and a few weeks ago, she offered him $10,000 to kill Lisa. It was a tempting offer, but what stopped him was his knowledge of Costa. Taylor was certain that he wouldn't make it out of the Fotopoulos house alive because Costa had an arsenal of weapons stored there. He refused, realizing that his own death could be part of the plan. Now, when he read the news, he immediately understood what had happened. Brian was his friend, and he didn't want Deirdre and Costa to get away with it. He knew Brian wasn't the killer, but he was terribly afraid of Costa. He realized that both he and Brian were in danger. The investigators believed the witness because it aligned with what they observed at the crime scene. The police wanted to talk to Deirdre, and they got lucky. She showed up at the police station herself. She confirmed Taylor's words but claimed that the idea to kill Lisa belonged not to her but to her lover. Lisa had found out about her husband's affair and planned to divorce him. In the event of a divorce, Costa would be left bankrupt, but if Lisa died, he hoped to receive a $700,000 insurance payout. In addition to that, Deirdre revealed that the bar was actually a front for money laundering. Costa had a business partner in Greece who produced counterfeit banknotes. That's why he hired street teenagers who didn't ask too many questions. The FBI had suspicions about this, but they didn't have evidence yet. Deirdre admitted that besides Taylor, she approached at least 3 other teenagers with an offer to kill Lisa. The initial plan was to attack Lisa at a Halloween party. However, her friend Taja James, who agreed to carry out the task, got scared of the crowd surrounding the victim. The next incident was the one Lisa reported to the police. After Taja's failures, Deirdre persuaded Brian to commit the crime, promising him $5,000. He was supposed to stage a car accident and then shoot her in the head. But Brian's car simply wouldn't start. The next time he tried to break into the house, he was scared off by the neighbors. Only on the 3rd attempt did he manage to get close to Lisa. Costa disabled the alarm, so the young man entered the house unimpeded, walked straight into the bedroom, and shot the sleeping young woman. He was supposed to shoot again, but the gun jammed, and while he was struggling with it, Costa emptied his entire magazine into him. Costa had initially planned to kill Brian to appear as a hero. But when he realized his wife was alive, he and Deirdre started brainstorming how to finish the job. They decided to dress Deirdre as a nurse and deliver a bomb disguised as flowers to Lisa's ward. Fortunately, the police were guarding Lisa's room, and this plan also failed. Deirdre's story seemed so incredible that the investigators could barely believe it. But it didn't end there. In an almost casual tone, sipping on a Diet Cola and taking a drag from her cigarette, Deirdre claimed that she and Costa had killed before. Their victim was a young man, 19-year-old Mark Kevin Ramsey, who worked at Co-Star's bar. The young man knew about the money laundering, but, unlike most teenagers who kept their mouths shut, he believed he deserved a share. He threatened to blackmail Costa, and Costa fired him. However, supposedly impressed by the young man's audacity, Costa offered Kevin to join a secret club of hired assassins. According to his words, it was an elite group of trained killers who received thousands of dollars for complex tasks ordered by the CIA. Costa mentioned that all recruits had to undergo an initiation ritual. Kevin agreed and allowed himself to be taken to the woods and bound. Costa promised that he and Deirdre would simply shoot near his feet for a few minutes to make sure he wouldn't flinch and would be capable of such work. Suddenly, Costa gave Deirdre a signal and she shot Kevin 3 times in the chest. Because it wasn't Kevin's initiation, it was Deirdre's. Then she approached the young man, grabbed him by the hair, lifted his head, and shot him in the temple. After that, Costa took his AK-47 and fired a final shot into Kevin's head. Then they both left without even untying their victim. As a successfully completed initiation ritual, Costa gave Deirdre a black beret and promised to make a monogram for the secret club when she tracked down and killed the next target. Upon hearing this story, the investigators began to suspect that they were dealing with a deranged person. The murder of a teenager whose disappearance wasn't even reported. Her words seemed too far-fetched to believe. To expose the liar, they asked her to lead them to Kevin's body. Without hesitation, Deirdre showed them the way. The poor boy's body still lay in the woods, where the lovers had left him, but that wasn't all. Deirdre made an even more significant statement that caused a sensation. She claimed the existence of a video capturing Kevin's execution. Initially, Deirdre was enthused about the recording, but then she realized that Costa would use it to keep her as his accomplice under control. Was the girl trying to portray her lover as a psychopath to protect herself? Or was there really a video that would lift the veil of secrecy over the hired assassins club? The investigators had to ascertain this. Costa, of course, denied everything, but upon obtaining a search warrant, the police found a cassette in his garage. It was a fully captured video of the teenager's murder. The boy screamed in pain and terror so intensely that the police officers in the room took a while to recover from what they had witnessed. But the crucial evidence in the recording was that Deirdre followed the instructions of a man behind the camera, a man with a distinct Greek accent. Simultaneously, the police unearthed the sports bag mentioned by Lisa. Inside were an AK-47 and the .22 caliber pistol, which the two had used during Kevin's murder. Deirdre Michelle Hunt and Konstantinos Fotopoulos were charged with the murder of Kevin, Brian, and the attempted murder of Lisa. During Deirdre's trial, prosecutors portrayed her as a ruthless and cold-blooded killer, but during Costar's trial, they presented her as his victim, someone who believed in his fabrications about secret agents and an exclusive club of top-notch assassins. The prosecutors themselves admitted to perceiving Deirdre's role differently in this case and couldn't agree on the matter. Perhaps the truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Deirdre's mother testified in her favor, confessing to mistreating her daughter when she was a child. Deirdre saw nothing but chaos in her life, so it's not surprising that she fell under Costar's influence. According to her testimony, Costa physically and psychologically tortured her, extinguished cigarettes on her, burned her with an iron, and committed other atrocities. An hour before the verdict was announced, she decided to admit her guilt in the crime to avoid the death penalty. However, the judge showed no sympathy towards her. Watching the video of Kevin's murder was enough for him to sentence her to death. Deirdre appealed based on the fact that while she was in prison, awaiting the opportunity to testify against Costa, her lawyer struck a deal with a television show to sell her interview for $5,000. Deceptively, he brought the filming crew to his client, claiming it was merely preparation for her testimony in court, but once there, he revealed they were journalists and persuaded her not to resist and to tell her story. The lawyer was banned from practicing law for a year as punishment. Deirdre's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Costa, who was also sentenced to death, filed appeals, but they were unsuccessful. He is still awaiting the execution of his sentence and possibly enjoying some attention by entertaining viewers with his tales about the CIA. Fortunately, even in this story, there are some positives. The doctors chose not to remove the bullet from Lisa's head, but she fully recovered and continues to lead a normal life, carrying on her father's work in Daytona Beach. She married a wonderful person and left behind the story with Costa and the 6 unsuccessful attempts on her life far behind her.